You're listening to Coding Blocks, episode 38. Subscribe to us and leave us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, and more using your favorite podcast app.
Visit us at codingblocks.net where you can find show notes, examples, discussion, and more.
Send your feedback, questions, and rants to comments at codingblocks.net. Follow us on Twitter at codingblocks or head to www.codingblocks.net and find all our social links there at the top of the page. Nobody even knows what's up. Do you know what that's about?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
Let's finish the introduction, then we'll get into it.
Yeah. And with that, welcome to Coding Blocks. I'm Alan Underwood.
I'm Joe Zach.
And I'm Michael Outlaw.
And today, for every time we say we'll be giving away $1.
Wait, whoa.
Okay, maybe not. But
No.
But we're really going to try and stop doing that.
Yeah. So since you brought up www, let's get into, if you're not already, we've been having a lot of like fun conversations over at codingblocks.slack.com. So you hit us up on Twitter. You could send us a DM, or you can email us at comments at codingblocks.net, or you could hit us up on Discuss. Right now, it's by invitation. So what I mean is hit us up on one of those sources, and we will add you to the team. But at some point, we will automate that to where it'll just be a click of a button. But
Here was the thing about the DM, and this is what I found out on Twitter. Twitter won't let you DM somebody that's not following you as well. And we've gotten several people that literally have been like, they will have just followed us, and so we haven't followed them, and they're like, hey, I can't DM you. So
right.
if you can't direct message us because we're not following you, it's not because we're trying to be rude. We're terrible at social. So, find one of the other ways. Definitely get it back to us. And even if you want to come drop a note on the, what are they called? The comments down at the bottom of our show notes page. Yeah, discuss. You can do that. And if you want to delete it afterwards so that your email's not hanging out on the interwebs for people to try and scrape, you can do that too. So,
yeah, I mean, that's totally your call.
Yeah, just find a way. But comments at codingblocks.net is a good way to do it. And we've had some great conversations over there, guys. A ton of really good conversations. People are talking amongst themselves and with us, and it's a lot of fun. We've got like 25 people in there right now, and it's really turned out to be pretty awesome.
Yeah, I didn't think anyone's going to join, but it's been really good and really funny, and I always learn something. That someone's always saying, have you looked at this? And I haven't, so it's been really great.
Yeah, I mean, not just the entertainment factor, but again, people are sharing tools. Stephen Kurt, I had a really great conversation with him the other day. He's attending some Microsoft conferences currently right now, and he's like shared a ton of useful information. So, definitely go up there and check it out. You'll learn something. You'll meet some new people. It's a lot of fun. So, we'll get into some more stuff here in a second, but I guess we should go with the flow of our show notes.
Well, yeah, I mean, I brought that up because of, you brought up the www thing. But actually, while you were speaking, I realized, oh yeah, that actually wasn't brought up on
a Stitcher review.
On the Slack channel. That was brought up as a Stitcher review comment. So point is, join us on Slack. We're having a lot of fun conversations over there, and it's just a place for like-minded developers. We can all chit chat about random topics, and there've been like some cool little one-liner like puzzles that we've thrown out there too, that have been little good brain teasers. So, fun times.
Yeah, and so the next part is our iTunes and Stitcher reviews. So, we've gotten one new review on iTunes. I think, Outlaw, you dug this one up, right?
Yeah, this one was from Australia, and it was awesome, from J.K. Cooper, too, so thank you. We've got some new reviews on Stitcher from the C Sharpest, Jupkins, and I'm going to mess up your name, Nick. Stewart?
Yeah, I think Stewart.
Okay, well, at least Alan agrees with me, so it can't be totally wrong. And Nick was the one that brought up the www. I guess I'm probably pretty bad about saying www.
Or dub. That's usually what I say. I
do that one too.
More.
But I was actually thinking about this because when he made this comment, basically he was joking around, or well, maybe he was serious about us not pronouncing www, but instead saying like either dub or www. But like, well, for one, I mean, come on, it's the year 2016. Nobody's got time for all that. Like, really? And then number two, like, the thing I was thinking about the other day is like, okay, I kind of feel like there was some guy that invented the alphabet, and this was his like, insert expletive here to the world, because he was like, you know what? I got A, B, C. I'm tired of all these single syllable letters. I want some letter with some strength about it, you know? You know what I'm saying? And so that's what like W was. There are more syllables and letters in W
One letter.
to say it than in the actual letter itself. That's crazy.
I think it might have been Master P. He's like,
That's pretty good.
That's
pretty
good, right?
You know, best impression. That's up there with the Wookiee impression.
And for all of you who haven't been around long enough, you just have to go look that one up. And I did want to bring up, so we talked about our Slack channel a second ago, and again, we're excited about it. It's fun. But I did have a great conversation with Stefan the other day, and he lives in Austria, and so that's really cool. And we got to chatting about, coding in general. And he shared a really cool story with how he got started into programming. It was all based out of wanting to do something really well in a video game. And he was having to keep track of how he was allocating resources and that stuff to go over and take over planets. And it's that kind of stuff that drives a lot of great programmers, right? Some people are motivated by money and they're like, hey, I want to get into computer science because I hear you make a lot of money, right? Those people usually don't last because, as you know, if you're listening to this podcast, if you've been in programming for a while, you know it's like lifelong dedication to learning, right? Like it really is. And if you stop learning, then chances are you're working in a job that's getting stale. And if anything ever happens to it, you're going to have a hard time adjusting. So that was just kind of interesting. So what I'd like you to do is, if you guys don't mind, if you get a second, go up to this particular episode and share your story about, what turned you on to programming. Was it, I don't know, you were doing a math problem and, oh man, I could make something that could totally do my homework for me, which is kind of what I ended up doing. Yeah. Or, was it a video game or was it?
I know video games are a big one.
They're huge, right?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely have friends like that was the thing, especially back in the LAN party days.
Yep.
Well, you go back to console party days, but yeah, the LAN party days, Joe knows what I'm talking about. When a lot of friends got started, that was their thing was, just trying to like either fix a problem in a game or trying to understand like how to make it work. Definitely reading the code, was how they got started and fixing the problems, to make it so that they could keep playing this fun game. Right.
Yep.
I mean,
levels.
Yeah, there's
and nowadays
tons of
it's
stuff.
like, nowadays kids for, this generation of kids, if they want to create a Minecraft mod, like that's a thing, right?
Some kids learn Java to be able to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. There are entire classes and courses and books about like just around Minecraft alone.
Yeah, so totally. If you guys want to share, an interesting story, bring it up there and post it on the site. And also, come join us on Slack and let's have a cool conversation. So that pretty much covers that part.
Well, speaking of comments, we have a riddle for you from episode 37.
Well, I don't know that
comments.
we have it. There was a riddle.
That's right.
We
Tired
can't
of the
take
carp.
credit for it.
We'll share it.
Yes. So let us know if you figure out what the answer is because it's been 3 days and he hasn't posted an answer. So the riddle is another survey, another contest, the Riddler, another poem. No. But how about a riddle? I'm both hot and cool at the same time. What am I?
Did you say who the author of that riddle was?
Yes. Tired of the carp.
Yes. I think there was a typo there. I don't know
Yeah.
if you can find it.
I wasn't sure if that
think-
was a slam or if he was just tired of fish. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I know I've heard this riddle before, but I can't remember it.
Yeah, this is going to drive me
Yeah,
crazy.
we're not going to try
Yeah.
to solve it now.
Yeah.
Well, but going back to the Slack channel for a minute, right? There was actually this time I'm prepared with a survey, right?
Very nice.
Because there were some interesting conversations on there, like apparently someone's sensitive about their age, all right? I don't know who, but apparently somebody. And one of the interesting conversations that came up there, I don't even remember who. Somebody posted this video, and I want to say it was Andy that posted this video of people jumping a puddle.
Oh, right.
Right? Now, I want to post this video in our show notes here, because I want you to take a look at this, because at the end, one person just decides, everyone else is walking around the puddle or jumping over the puddle, but this one person is just like, you know what, I'm going for it. I'm walking.
Hold on. They weren't walking around the puddle. They were actually having to climb through mud and trees to get around the puddle.
No, they were not. You were totally exaggerating. It wasn't exactly the easiest thing to walk around because of the way the path, because there was a handrail around the path. But, so it was a little bit of an effort. A little bit. But, someone, maybe Alan, said that the last person who just straight up walked right through this puddle did the smart thing. And I'm like, wait a minute, what?
Dude,
what?
It wasn't even an inch of water. Like, your soles on your flip-flops would have been deeper than that puddle was.
No way, man. You gotta walk. If you can walk around it or walk over it, then you walk around it or over it, man. You don't walk through a puddle.
Yeah, but these people weren't just walking around it. It wasn't like they could just, strafe to the side of it. They were literally climbing trees.
And by the way, like everyone in there, like they kind of looked, the dress of everyone in the video, it wasn't like they were like super casual, right? They were wearing, nice clothes. Like it looked like they were probably going to work or someplace,
I think what we're getting at here is Outlaw totally would have spent half an hour trying to figure out how to get around this puddle.
I just thought it was crazy that you said that the smart guy, the only one who was smart was the one that walked through it. I'm like, that can't possibly be. Nobody would agree with that statement, right?
I think everybody.
We're going to find out. We're going to find out, because this is science, and in the name of science, we're gonna do this survey.
Awesome.
So it was either that or I do have a backup survey if you want to hear it.
No, let's keep the other one for the next one. I think that's a good survey.
All right.
So go to episodes /episode 38, watch the video, and vote in the poll.
Yeah, we definitely need to find this out for science purposes. And then I don't know, Joe, if you've noticed this, but I think this celebrity has gotten to Alan's head here, because for all you dear listeners that don't already know, Alan was recently interviewed. He was on another podcast here, the MS Dev Show. What do you got to say for yourself, Mr. Celebrity?
I wasn't getting any romance here at home, so
Alan was stepping out.
I had to step on out.
Wow.
And then you guys started showing me love again, so I'm back.
That's harsh.
Yeah.
No,
But we've mentioned MS Dev Show before. It's a great show, and it's a great episode. So, yeah, you guys should definitely check it out. We'll have a link in the show notes.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. So, hopefully, you guys go over there, learn some stuff. They have lots of episodes about tools and stuff. And this particular episode was about our tools.
Wow, that just sounded, that was not
Well,
a really good or even planned.
interesting. Yeah, so no,
They talk about tools and stuff.
our tool
and-
episode.
And this time they talk about our tools.
Right, yeah, no, okay, so that's great. Yeah, that's the way to sell it. Go check out that episode. We'll have a link in the show notes.
And
I would say
what was the
maybe
question
instead
you
of
got?
saying they talk about instead of saying that they talk about tools and stuff, maybe say they talk about a lot of Microsoft technologies.
Well, all kinds of technologies, just not just Microsoft. They actually talk
Not
about
just,
all kinds
but a
of stuff.
lot of them, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, there is a focus.
And if you're into Azure and that kind of thing, they have like an Azure tip of the week. So it's an excellent show. Great guys over there. Always excellent sound quality as well, which is for me like a big deal. Like I can't listen to a podcast with bad sound quality. So
And
go check 'em out.
don't say the answer, but what question did they ask you?
They asked me, would I rather give up celebrating my birthday or celebrating the winter holidays?
All right, don't answer. You gotta go over there and listen to the show to find out Alan's answer.
That's right. Nice.
All right. All right.
All right.
So, oh yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just saying we were done with the news, so I want to tell you what we're going to be talking about this episode. And basically, the deal is that we found a great summary/book that attempts to cover the entire spectrum of everything you need to know about being a programmer. And it's got kind of sections on like harder skills, like technical stuff, debugging, stuff like that, as well as like people, managerial type skills. And we've all read it, and so we're going to give it a go. It's divided into 3 sections. The first one is geared towards beginners, but really, it's useful for developers of all experience levels. And yeah, I'm excited. I said like 3 times in there. I'm going to be broke by the end of this episode.
So you're going to be a poor man.
Yeah, I think he owes like $50.
So before we get started in this, like when we first talked about this particular topic, I have to admit, like I was not looking forward to it because I don't know, just sometimes when you read things about programming, you know, what it takes, they can come off as really boring, but this was a pretty good read. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a terribly long essay, but it's got some good content in it. And, you know, each section is bite size. It's easily digestible. So, yeah, it was a good little fun read. So,
Yeah, and it's 60 pages total. It was published in 2002. And the first section, the beginner section, is roughly like 17 pages. You know, there's some contents and some indexes and appendixes that make it so it's not actually that many pages, but it's a really quick read. And you can actually get it on your Kindle from Amazon as well. It's actually got a book as well. It's really cheap. I think it's like $1.99. We'll have a link to that.
now here's the crazy thing is that, you know, go back to that episode. I want to say it was episode 3. We still don't understand open source licensing.
right.
Does that sound right? I'll verify that in a moment. But
5.
what? It was 5?
I believe it was 5.
Oh, well, I don't know I don't understand our episode numbering either. But this book was actually has a GNU free documentation license on it. Like I thought that was awesome and interesting that it was, you know, and clearly stated right there in the appendix. Like here's the.
So what can you
license
do
for
with
it.
that?
Oh, it goes over all kinds of interesting details about like, you know, you can use this for commercial purposes, and as long as you include the license, you can. There's verbatim copying in it. Like, I'm no lawyer, so I don't know.
Yep.
But yeah, I thought it was interesting that the book, like literally one of the appendixes is here's the license to the book.
Yeah, I think that basically the deal is you can take this content and do other stuff with it as long as you kind of maintain that license so that other people can do the same. And so the information just kind of propagates and, theoretically lives along and gets updated as needed, which is really cool.
Yep, and I will say this thing was written several years ago, and honestly, I didn't read anything that I would really dispute in it. So I think there was a lot of interesting things. There's probably things that we'll each feel more passionately about than some of the other topics, but I think it's worth starting. Let's dive into this thing.
Well, I should mention that because it was written in 2002, that was pre-cloud. It was also pre-Git. So they are missing the section on how to revert merges, which would be very important for any sort of programmer coming of age now. It's difficult and confusing.
You just get cloned to a new directory. I don't know that that's taught anywhere.
Revert your merge, like a merge gone bad.
Yep.
It's never happened.
Just reset. Get reset hard head.
All right,
That's
so
why
let's
we
do
pull
this
request.
thing.
What? Pull request.
That's why we pull request. Yep. All right, so the first kind of part of the first section we're talking about for beginners here is personal skills. And at the top of this, we've got learning to debug.
Yeah, and one of the I highlighted this, and this particular quote in it is awesome to me. A programmer that cannot debug effectively is blind. And that about sums it up right there. I mean,
Yeah, and I should also mention too, like I don't want to. There's a lot of these chapters, so yeah, I don't want to like go too deep in any one of them, only because we'll never get through all of them. But yeah, that was a great quote though.
Yeah, and one thing I think is kind of interesting, and they kind of hint at it, is you're going to be spending so much more time debugging than doing anything else. Like you are going to be clicking that F10 button to the step through, or looking at logs or print lines. You're going to spend so much more time doing that than you are going to be typing new code. It's not even funny. So debugging is very important.
Yeah. So yeah, I totally agree. I wasn't necessarily crazy about the methods that were mentioned, because basically, this section gets into, in order to learn to debug, you need to get visibility into how the program works, right? Like if you just started a brand new job, right? And they're like, "Hey, here's a ticket. Go fix this ticket." Right? Like the first thing you got to do is start stepping through to see like, well, how does it before I even look in the code, maybe like see like, okay, what steps does it take to reproduce this problem? And then, okay, now that I saw the its running state and how that worked, like where are those actions at? And let me start driving into this thing to see like, okay, well, where is this part executing and how does this happen? So, you got to gain visibility into it. And they mentioned there were three that were mentioned for ways of getting into that, and they were categorized as using a debugging tool, print lining, and logging. And I guess especially the print lining one just didn't sit well with me. I mean, I guess it's sometimes
Been
you
a
gotta
few
do it.
years ago though too. I mean, if you think
Oh
about that.
yeah, totally good, great point.
I mean, because
This is
back
like
then,
13 years old.
right? Yeah, back then, that's kind of what you did.
Back then.
Yeah, I mean, 13 years is a long time in terms of programming. I mean, look at how far things have come, even in 5.
Yep.
Were there any good JavaScript debugging tools 5 years ago?
Well,
5, yeah. I would say the Firebug.
Firebug
I
was
guess
pretty close.
I
yeah.
guess what I didn't like the most about it wasn't that the author wasn't correct. It's just that like I cringe every time you're in an environment like that, right? It's like,
Right.
Every
Like-
time you're working in JavaScript? Just tell me that you don't still
Hey.
do console.logs and throw some extra information, because that's
Hey.
not logging, because you delete it before you check it in. It
That would-
happens.
Console.log would totally be an example of print lining,
Yep.
right? Like anytime you're writing out to, a standard out, right? That would be print lining. But I can beat that though, because it wasn't so long. Like it's been a few years for me since I've last used Xcode, but I can totally remember a time with using Xcode where if you wanted to debug the value of a variable, you had to output the value somewhere, whether that be to a log file or to the console. And that's why, like, when I read that, I was like, I just kind of cringed inside because I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, that's
even,
horrible.
Debugging tools are great for static languages, or I guess not necessarily static, but just compiled languages. And if you're working in something like Ruby or Python or something, the debugging tools there are really, really rough. It's just not the same. So, sometimes print lining and logging are, your main options. But whenever I see print lining, I know that there's a failure in testing, because what you're doing is basically validating, that certain areas of the code work or have the expected input. So, what that means is that code isn't tested and you're not really confident that it's working. And, that's valid. It happens, but it's just something to think about.
Well, they
Yeah.
also said though sometimes you're using like a third-party library where you can't
Yep.
step through their code, so you don't have a ton of other options. Then you're back into either logging or print lining, right? Print lining is usually more if you're trying to step through the problem, whereas your logging is, you've got a more long-term solution in place typically if you're doing logging type things. So
Now, I will expand on Joe's example, though, for the print lining or the logging, where you mentioned just spitting out a value. I've actually done in the past where like just outputting like, hey, I'm entering or leaving a method too, because
Oh, yeah.
I know that the method's good and I'm trusting the method, but sometimes it's just helpful to see like, make sure
the flow.
like what the call stack flow, like what's happening. So, in lieu of a call stack from an exception, I'm creating a call stack at like runtime just to see like how it's going through. So, I mean, it's been horribly gross and, usually more verbose than I ever wanted. So,
Now, here's one thing that was kind of interesting in this entire chapter. Like, this was one of the longer sections, if I remember right. But one of the things they said is you have to learn to poke at the code and make it jump. You have to learn to experiment on it and understand that nothing you temporarily do to it will make it worse. If you feel this fear, seek out a mentor. All right. I take a little bit of issue with that. Saying that nothing you do temporarily to it can make it worse is not necessarily true, right? Like if you have some sort of transactional system and you jack something up that is a credit card type processing type thing, and
Well, first off, you're not debugging in production, though.
it doesn't say, it doesn't make that distinction. But I'm just saying, like saying that temporarily changing code doesn't jack something up. This isn't talking about environments. If you are trying to live change something like, Ruby or a scripted language in a production environment, what you do could have really bad implications.
Well, okay, but we're talking about debug here, and it sounds like you're talking about like,
I've you telling me you've never cowboy debugged in production? Really? I've definitely done it.
Oh yeah,
Definitely.
I've never. Well, I guess you know how, not detailed. That's not the word I'm looking for, but like,
No,
how
you're
calculated,
cautious.
calculated. Let's use that word. Because like if I'm making a change, then I'm trying to be like absolutely certain like this isn't going to impact something else. But yeah, you're right. I mean, but that's still like a really bad habit, and that's not what this is trying to. This isn't trying to teach you like cowboy it, as you put it. That totally sounds America. But yeah, I mean, but the point being is that, especially for a new developer, you have to get over this fear of like, well, I can't modify this, right? Like, no, you can't be afraid to break it. You need to get into that code. You need to tear it apart to understand it, and try things and see what happens. And that's the essence of what the author was getting at here.
I completely agree. I just didn't want anybody to think that, making changes to code isn't going to hurt anything. You need to be aware of what situation you're working in, but totally agree. The best programmers out there are the ones that are just like, I'm getting my hands dirty, right? I'm going to figure out what's going on, and you dig in and you dig deep typically. So,
well, speaking of which, I have 2 questions for you guys. Number one, our friend John has a habit of calling this the granny method. You know what I'm talking about? Have you ever had a problem and you just can't figure out what the heck's going on, and so you just start deleting the sections of the code until something works, and then like slowly kind of putting it back together until you figure out what's going on?
I believe you just jumped into section 2 of this first one, which is how to debug by splitting up the problem space.
Right.
So that's kind of a common way of solving the problem. So it's kind of weird to me that they split it, into a different section. So maybe I'll take this license and add that to their list here. But I did have one more question for you guys. Have you
Well,
ever
I didn't get the first question.
Well, he was saying it. Well, I guess you didn't ask a question. Go
are
ahead.
familiar with, or you guys use the granny method?
All the time.
Have we?
All
Yeah,
the time.
sure.
Yeah, all the time.
It's an excellent way to do it. I mean, you split it up until you find what's breaking it, right?
I don't know about if I would say all the time. I kind of view it as like, that's like a
when you find,
last resort kind of thing.
when you can't find the problem easily, right? That's
Like, because
yes.
he's literally talking about like deleting or commenting out,
Yeah.
big sections.
It typically is a last resort. You've been chasing something for an hour and nothing seems to work, and then basically your last resort is, okay, let me just go cut this code in half
Unless
and
it's
see what happens.
CSS. And then if it's CSS, you've been chasing this problem for 18 hours.
Yeah.
And
For
you're
that
still
one
not
pixel.
sure how to make it work across all the browsers.
And I think
Especially
this
IE.
goes hand in hand with print lining. Like if I'm print lining, it's probably a similar situation where I don't know what the heck's going on, and I'm just trying to get more insight. And yeah, so granny method and print lining go hand in hand for me.
Yeah, that's true. I would agree with that. But sometimes you'll do the print lining before you even get to the granny method, right? Because now
Yeah.
you're just trying to track it down. Granny method is I give up. I'm deleting everything a little bit at a time until I find the one piece that's breaking.
Yep.
So yeah.
Well, I did
So
have one
question
more question.
2.
Yeah, I want to hear this one.
Have you guys ever had a situation where, say, your boss says, "Hey, I found a problem in," and before they even finish the sentence, you know what the problem is and how to fix it?
No, because I've never had a problem with my code.
No. I've never had a situation where someone says, "There's something weird on the cart page," and I'm like, "Oh no." out of the way. And I kind of wonder, it's like, how did I know as soon as someone says there is a problem, how did I know that there was a problem, and why didn't I prevent that problem? It's like, it's almost like a little hidden nugget in your brain.
Well, I've had situations where it was like, I'm trying to think, like it wasn't necessarily a bug per se, but it was like I knew that maybe the layout, like this button was to the right of this one, and I thought like, hey, that's fine, right? Like that's the way it was supposed to be. And then someone comes along and is like, hey, did you know this button's over here? And I'm like, okay, yeah, I can move it or whatever. Like there've been, obviously that's a contrived example and it's a really silly one, but there've been times like that where it's something like, I kind of knew, but I kind of thought that was also supposed to, the way it's supposed to be.
Actually, I can think of a solid example that I had well, maybe not solid, but a real example that I had in the past where I remember saying in my code, like, I have no idea how in the world you would ever get to this point. I have tried this 5 million different ways, but I'm putting this little catch down here at the bottom so that if it ever does happen, then, somebody can maybe go back and figure out what happened. And I actually had a guy email me a screenshot of my code one time and was like, how did I even get down here?
Right.
And it's one of those things you're like, I totally don't know. I tried to figure it out. But yeah, I mean,
in Alan's defense, I'm going to go ahead and like let the audience know like that was code he inherited because as I'm listening to the story, I'm like, wait a minute. So he wrote some code that he had no idea how he could possibly get to it.
No, this was completely inherited code, but it's one of those things too, like where you say, somebody comes up to you, you're like, oh, I totally know what you're talking about, and I have no idea how it got there.
Yep.
So how to debug by splitting the problem space, right? So one of the things that I liked about this section too was that it the way one of the methods that was described here, it kind of reminded me of like a binary search algorithm.
Yes.
Right? Like you just keep dividing the code until you get to the part where the problem is, right? Like once you've verified a half of it that nope, it's not in that half, then you go to the next.
That's totally it. You just keep chopping it down. And it's pretty effective. I mean, like I said, a lot of times that's like a, last ditch effort, but it's very effective. You just got to remember to undelete all that code that you deleted while you're in the middle.
That's
That's
really important. That is really important. Definitely seen situations where something's not working, so you just kind of comment out the section of the code that's not working because it doesn't really apply to what you're doing, and then it gets checked in, and all of a sudden it's like, what the heck is happening?
I've definitely been on the receiving end of that where someone left the commented out code checked in, and you're like, wait, which yeah, that's always frustrating to be like, well, I don't understand why you commented that out. Is that legit? And if it's commented out legitimately because you don't want it there, why didn't you just delete it?
Yeah, and that happens. Like we all do things sometimes where we kind of put little shortcuts in the code to help us, get to where we need to get to. But I think, looking at the stuff after you checked it in, like reviewing your own code or having someone else do a code review or a pull request helps. But if you've got a large feature with say 100 of modified files, then it can really hide out there, and it can be hard to know that that's a problem. So that is a real danger when you're modifying code in order to work on something.
Yeah, that's one reason why like that granny method, as it was put, that's one reason why I kind of reserved that for like a last ditch effort, right? Like that's the Hail Mary. I couldn't find it otherwise, so I'm going to try this because there's another section in here, and I don't remember what, but it was talking about, actually it was the next section about how to remove the error. And it was talking about like making the smallest amount of change necessary to fix the bug. Right. And I feel like in that approach, that granny approach that you're referring to, that you're not adhering to that because you're introducing a whole bunch of change by deleting or commenting out things or changing whatever the normal flow of the application is, right? Like you're changing all of that. So that's why I don't like that method. But in regards to this, binary search type approach that the author gives here, I mean, that's certainly one way that you could try to approach the problem.
Well, one thing that I want to point out that Joe said that I think is huge and this kind of jumps into a further later on. We'll talk about it in a little while, but source control with pull requests. That is, if you find yourself doing things like this is where pull requests become extremely important, because not only if you can get another set of eyes on it, but sometimes it's useful just to have that visual interface to show you what you've changed, right? Like you push that thing up there and you say, wait a second, I don't remember changing that many files, so it can be a nice visual tool just for yourself, so that you could say, so you can kind of double check yourself, like do a sanity check.
So I'm going to give you a tease here, okay? Because I am rather, let's say, meticulous when it comes to putting together my commits and pull requests. And like I review my own stuff like crazy, like mad, before I put that commit or pull request in. So I've got a tip for you that's going to help out with that.
Let's do that.
Well, wait.
Oh, okay.
That's why it's a tease.
Oh, okay. I know what it is. All right.
All right. So,
Okay.
yeah, I don't know what else to say about splitting it. So, and as far as like, the next section about removing the error, like I said, the author here was talking about like introducing the smallest amount of change necessary to fix the bug. And he also makes another great point too, that like sometimes there might be several bugs that are disguised as one. And sometimes as the developer, you have to make the call like, well, do I fix all of these, or do I just fix this one and then maybe ticket the other ones? Because, maybe their scope is so grand that it's like, well, I'm not going to be able to do it as one person in a given amount of time, right? Like, you might have reasons that, to ticket it so that it can, as a call to action to the rest of your team, right? That like, hey, this needs attention, right?
And you don't want to introduce new regressions. Like he even goes into, or I assume it was a he. Who was the author?
Oh yeah, we didn't say the author's name, but
No,
it
we
is a
didn't.
he. Oh, you did? It was Robert.
Robert Reed.
Yes,
Okay.
Robert L. Reed.
Red.
So the thing that he also says is, even if you see other code in there, this is not cleanup time, right? You shouldn't. If your goal is to go in and fix a bug, you shouldn't be going in there and trying to clean up code or rewrite a bunch of code. You're supposed to try and fix the bug. And then that way you understand the change set that you're making. You fully understand it, right? Like if you start trying to go through and make major sweeps.
I do take a little bit of an issue with that though. But I will say this though. And because getting back to the core essence of what he meant here, like I ran into an issue even as recently as last week where like I saw some problems that weren't necessarily part of the ticket that I was working on, but I thought, well, I can fix that while I'm here, right? And then that ended up being a rabbit hole all by itself, like just a gigantic, deep rabbit hole of like, oh my God, I can't believe I had to change that much stuff.
Right.
And then, when problems came about, I was like, okay, look, the real thing that I was trying to fix here was like maybe 3 lines. And now I've got like, 81 files that have changed because I wanted to fix this other thing. No way, man. I'm like, and it's not working. So I'm undoing that. And I'm just sticking to the one fix. So sometimes you have to be aware of that, but to say no cleanup at all. Sorry about that. To say no cleanup at all, though, I don't necessarily agree with that because I also like, and I think we've talked about this, the Boy Scout principle of making it better than you found it, right? Like leave it cleaner than you found it. So like if you see some little things in there, like especially like you mentioned JavaScript a minute ago. So like if you see like, oh, this line doesn't have a semicolon and it should. It's JavaScript, so it'll still work. But, hey, make the world a little bit cleaner and put it in there, right? Like there's little things that you could do.
If you fully understand the code that you're working in, like if it's somewhere that you've been before and you're pretty familiar with it, I totally agree with that. If it's something where you're working in a new area of code that maybe you're not as familiar with and so you don't know the ins and outs and the pitfalls, then that can be dangerous. It's like you said, you went down a rabbit hole, right? And I'm not saying that you should avoid that either because that is how you learn things. But if your goal was to fix this one problem and it's a major issue, then that should be your first task and anything else is secondary to that. So I agree with it. I also agree with the Boy Scout rule. I try and leave things nicer than what, I came in, but you do have to know your limit, sort of. What are you trying to accomplish?
Right. Not major refactorings,
Right.
but like as a developer, we owe it to ourselves and to, who the company, the client, whoever the receiving end of that code is, like you owe it to them. If you're going to be in the file, and you see some things that aren't huge major refactoring efforts that you could do to clean that up, then clean it up, because you're only helping yourself out the next time you come along.
Right.
So
I agree with that. What
All
about
right.
debugging using a log? I thought this was
Yeah.
pretty straightforward.
yeah, I didn't really think that there was anything more to add to that, as far as like, what we hadn't already said.
Yeah, I mean, we even covered this pretty well in the 12-factor app episode where we were talking about logging. So,
Yeah,
Yeah.
we love logs. We should
Yeah.
make a shirt that just says "We heart" or "I heart logs."
I think the one thing to point out here is with anybody that's dealt with logs, there's different log levels, right? Your info, your warns, your trace, that kind of stuff. So really what you want to do is you want to make sure that if you do have logging statements in your application, make sure that you have them in the right places so that all you have to do is change a config and now you can get that extra information. So that's really the one key thing here, other than, it's a stream of information. It tells you your flow. So
Yeah, and I think Jason mentioned that one of his favorite things about Log4net on the MS Dev show that you were on. So yeah, we like that, and we talked about logging a lot in the 12-factor app. So we will have a link to that.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember too if it was even maybe if it was in that episode that you just mentioned, Joe, or if it was in this section where they were talking about changing it on the fly. I think that was in the episode that Alan was on,
yeah, I don't
where they talked
remember.
about changing the log level like as the app was running. I thought that was an interesting approach too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that would be really cool.
So, next, how to understand performance problems.
Yeah, this was a big, good section. And one thing I thought was interesting is they said that it was easier than debugging. Do you guys think that performance problems are easier to deal with than debugging?
I definitely did a double take when I read that. I was like, I mean, after reading the rest of it, I understood where he was going with it. But initially, I was like, whoa, wait, what? That's a bold statement.
Right.
I sort of disagree because it depends on what your environment looks like, right? What is your stack? If you have 20 different pieces that come together to make your application work, then trying to find the performance bottlenecks might be a little bit more challenging. And if
That's
it's a
true.
black box, you're using some third-party cloud service, you have no idea what's going on. It can be a real challenge to find that stuff out. So,
Well, I guess too, this is like another reason why I don't know. I really don't know that I stand by that statement, because he makes the statement of saying, or the point of saying that, like, before you try to make something faster, you need to have a good mental model of why it's slow. But that to me signals that you already have like a strong understanding of the overall picture of the application, right? Like its architecture and what components it's talking to, or what external backing services it's talking to, things like that. Like, and if you just start debugging an app for the first time, like, you're not going to have all that, but you might be able to say like, oh, well, this is the page that is where I'm at, where this form is at. So I can easily find that. So now I've, dramatically reduced the scope of the problem down to this one page, right? And then I can go from there, and I know that it's on this form. So now within that page, I've narrowed the scope even further, and I know that it's on this submit button. So now I've narrowed it even further. So the debugging part actually felt a little bit easier to me, depending on what type of problem you're trying to solve, right?
it also depends on the type of profiling tools that you have, right? If you're trying to do a SQL Server type thing, it's fairly easy nowadays to run a profiler and find out what is terrible. If you're working with some sort of third, cloud service, you may not have those kind of tools available to you.
That's
So
a good point.
it depends on what you're working with, and that's why this is such a tough one. And back then maybe it wasn't as hard, because he does go on to speak a lot about most of your performance bottleneck is IO. Okay,
Right. And in your case of the cloud, that would be IO bound, right?
Yeah, and
And
network bound, whatever it may. There's so many different pieces that come into play.
well,
with
some
this
form
now.
of IO.
Right.
Yeah, and he has in there the the line about 90% of your time is going to be spent in 10% of the code,
Yep, totally.
right?
And one thing I liked here too is that he mentioned that it's usually not worth trying to get like a 2 or 3 times improvement. Usually you're looking for some sort of order of magnitude. So 10 times improvement, 100 times improvement. It doesn't really matter if something takes 3 seconds or 6 seconds sometimes. But if you can get it from 3 seconds down to 30 nanoseconds, then that's pretty impressive.
This kind of brings up one thing though, that one of the reasons why I like Meteor.js, it was an article I read where a guy was like, a lot of us as seasoned programmers know how things work pretty intimately, right? Like we know all the things top to bottom. And so we'll focus on the most minute of details, starting off like, oh, I'm going to make this thing to work and scale to 5 million servers. You only got 10 users, right?
Right.
So that's one thing I want to bring up with this. Performance is something you attack as it becomes a problem. Build your application, get your MVP out there, and then go back. And I know that's kind of outside the scope of this. But
Well, it's actually not, because if we go into the next section, which was how to fix performance problems, it's what you're saying is right on par
that's a
with
good point,
with
yeah.
that section, because there was actually one of the things he says is don't waste a lot of time trying to optimize something if it's only used 1% of the time,
Right.
which is kind of in the same vein of what you're getting at. That if you're only going to have a few users using the thing, don't try to over architect it so that it can handle a babillion users concurrently, right? And
Yeah.
I said babillion, so that's got to be a real
I
number.
like it.
One of the quotes in here that I liked was, as a rule of thumb, you should think carefully before doing anything unless you think it is going to make the system or a significant part of it at least twice as fast. So going back to Joe's order of magnitude larger, you're talking about 100% improvement, right? So that's what they're saying. Unless it becomes a problem, don't be spending time on it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of times it's tempting to do what I call micro optimization. So like swapping out arrays for lists or things like that. And a lot of times those are nowhere near the bottlenecks. It's that that query you've got running in a loop 1,000 times that's killing you.
Unnecessary inner loops
Yep.
is one that he
Yep.
specifically calls out.
Yeah, just optimizing loops in general is a big section of the.
I
the
did
next
like
little
the
part
example
here.
that he gave here about counting cows by their legs instead of by their head. But then I was like, oh, what if there's a 3-legged cow? Then you're going to
Yeah.
overcount the legs.
And he also said, before you talk about redesigning any part of a system, will it make it 5 to 10 times faster? Because as we all know, redesigning any portion of anything can take a significant amount of time. So you really do have to weigh the benefits with the opportunity cost of what you may be leaving on the table. Just do some redesign.
And these are just the beginner
Yeah.
steps of how to be a programmer.
Yeah, this is the basics. So
Yeah, it is really important. And it's also really important to use a profiling tool. And even if that tool is just looking at logs, like you really shouldn't be guessing at what you think are the slowest parts of your application, because oftentimes that will be wrong.
Yeah, but you mentioned logs and guessing, though. Wasn't that specifically one of the things the 12-factor app called out as if you were using logs to, how did they put it? Forget it. I can't remember it.
I'd rather use logs than just going around and swapping out micro optimizations, moving variables at the top, or reusing variables.
man,
God
I
forbid.
can't find it in
Yeah.
here, but there was somewhere, and it might have been this section or another one, where he said, "Don't make like weird looking changes. If you're gonna make something like just minorly faster, if it's at the expense of readability and maintainability, it may not be worth it." I think
Right.
it was in this section, but I can't find it.
Oh, I
It
think
was.
I know. Yeah, I recall that vaguely. We'll get to it. But, we mentioned dealing with like inner loops and unnecessary loops and whatnot. And Joe, you brought up that there was a whole section on, how to optimize loops, which is, the next section. And there were some interesting ones in here. Like, he says, try not to divide.
Yeah, I saw that.
I was like, that's an awesome little, like, it's a micro optimization, right? I mean, but I guess if you're trying to, squeeze out that extra bit, there you go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I will wager though, if you're working on a modern web application, that dividing in a loop is not your problem.
Right. Well, but it was one of the ones he lists here.
Yep.
Again, to Alan's point from earlier, though, this is like a 13, 14-year-old document, but still, I mean, even division wasn't that big a deal back then, but yeah.
Try not to do expensive typecast. That's actually a big one because that can take up heap space and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, typecast, yeah, I mean, that's a big one, definitely.
No, so this kind of goes off on a small tangent. I was listening to a JavaScript Jabber today, and they were talking about the Internet of Things. It was
I thought you were going to bring up Meteor again because we know how you feel about Meteor.
no. So here was something that was kind of cool. Is we think about things that we program in terms of, how many gigs of RAM do you use? We've got pretty fast processors and all that.
I've never thought about that.
Well, I mean, you don't think about it. I guess that's what I'm saying is you kind of take it for granted. Like what we write, we just know it's going to work for the most part, right? They were talking about in this, the one guy designs chips that they're running JavaScript engines on now, and they might be small subsets, but he's like, some of these chips run at 8 megahertz. Some of them run at 200 megahertz. And so when you start thinking about things like this might still be valid depending on what your type of platform or architecture is.
Yeah, fair enough.
So,
and remember, this book was written in 2002, so that's right when Google was getting started. They got started in 98, so this is around the time that you heard about Google. And this is 1 year after XP was released.
wow.
So times were a little different back then.
Nice to put that into perspective. So what you're telling me is Hotbot was on its way out.
That's right.
Alta Vista. Yeah,
about
and there was
Hotmail.
another one of the optimizations though for loops that was mentioned here was moving a pointer rather than recomputing indices, and this made me recall back. I think it was Mike that made the suggestion. Alan had the tip of the week about using the for each loop,
Right.
and how to deal with modifying that for each loop while you're iterating through it. And then I want to say it was a Twitter message that came in, Mike, that said, "Oh yeah, because it was Mike, because he sent the tweet about I've been mentioned on Coding Blocks,
right?"
And he had mentioned, well, if you use a for loop instead of a for each loop, then you don't have the problem of that exception when iterating through it.
Yeah, because you're no longer referencing something that you're changing.
I'm gonna look it up. I'm gonna look up that Twitter handle real quick, just so that way he gets mentioned twice, because I know it was on his resume.
Right.
So I definitely thought it was interesting to spend so much time on loops, but the next one was more
Mike
relevant
DePaul.
to me.
Right.
Dealing with I/O problems, and they mentioned 3 main solutions for dealing with that, which I thought were all good. Basically, caching lets you avoid it. Representation, that's basically storing your data in a smaller format in order to make it more efficient. And the third one was they called it improve locality, or pushing the computation closer to the data. I think of that as something like doing your where clause and your source and your order bys in your database rather than in code, stuff like that. Just moving the work kind of further away from where you're fetching it to.
Yep. You just covered that entire section.
Yeah, sorry. That was a good section, and I just totally
Yeah, I was like,
ruined it.
I don't know what to say about that.
No, I mean
Yep.
that sums it up. That was it.
The next
Well,
section was managing memory. Oh, go ahead.
I don't know that he said this though, but there's a quote about often it's just the question of improving the I/O is, it's better to question improving the I/O than some loop, right? So rather than going through optimizing a loop, sometimes it's better to go and look at your I/O, and that's going to have orders of magnitudes of a performance benefit on your application.
Yep.
All right.
And,
So how to manage memory.
Yeah, and so depending on your language, this can all kind of vary a lot. But one topic that kind of comes up a lot of times with OO, with garbage collected languages, is basically stack memory versus heap. And I don't know if we've done a real big deep dive on this topic, but we should if we haven't.
No, we did totally. Back when we talked about boxing and unboxing
Oh, that's right.
in .NET, because we actually got into the garbage collection, stack pointers, heap pointers, all that when they get cleaned up. Your 2 stages of garbage collection. We really did go deep on that one. That might have been episode 2 or 3. Like it was pretty.
Yeah, it was
early
episode 2.
It was
That
episode
was a
2.
good one. I don't think it got a lot of love because boxing doesn't sound very sexy, but I think
Well,
was
that
a
and I
pretty
think
good
we
one.
had in .NET in the title,
Right.
And so
Yeah.
it's like, well, who cares about boxing and unboxing in .NET? And like, why do I, if I don't already know what that is, then I'm probably not going to care about it if I'm not a .NET developer. So it definitely wasn't a fan favorite, but
And-
it's still some good content in it.
Yeah, and we actually got better about this over time because what we found out as we started doing the podcast more and more is a lot of these topics transcend various different languages, right? So even that episode, if you don't know a lot about memory management and you don't know much about garbage collection and what boxing or any of that is, this applies to basically any kind of language that runs in some sort of VM. So Java, .NET, any of those kind of things. So while the specifics might be slightly different, that is an excellent episode to go back and find out about how your memory is managed for you.
Yeah, and functional languages typically do a pretty good job of keeping this stuff, keeping the memory usage down. So you don't have to really think about that as much. But I think that most people are still probably working in OO languages, although you hear about functional more and more every year.
Yeah, definitely. And a lot of people are bringing those functional type patterns over into OO. So picking up things. There was a quote in this particular section.
That's where faux came from, right?
I don't know, faux.
Functional object oriented.
Oh,
I've never heard of it.
oh, you should have a link for that. So
I was making that joke
it.
about I made that joke about faux programming before. Never mind.
It's gone.
Yeah.
So check
Right
this
over.
out. People have probably heard the term memory leak before, and there was actually a pretty decent little line in here for this. A classic mistake is to use a hash table as a cache and forget to remove the references in the hash table. Since the reference remains, the reference is non-collectible but useless. Basically, nothing's using it anymore, but you can't get rid of it, and this is called a memory leak. So basically, this thing hangs around forever because it can't be garbage collected. Now, I would venture to say that a lot of our more recent garbage collection has gotten smart enough to take care of these type things.
Well,
Maybe not.
so there was another great quote in here. This is probably my favorite one of the document or the essay because for all Objective-C developers, this one is going to ring true for you. You're going to love this, especially if you've been doing Objective-C for a while, right? And it's talking about he's talking about garbage collection and how dealing with allocating memory and freeing it up when you're done with it and trying to automate that through some kind of garbage collection process is so different. It's so difficult a problem that the programmers often don't implement a often simply implement. This is easy for me to say. I'm trying to read this quote. It's so difficult that programmers often simply implement a rudimentary. Why can't I say this word? Gee, form of garbage collection. Just trust that Alan said it. Such as reference counting to do this for them. So
That's sad.
But that's how Objective-C works, though. It uses a reference count to know when it can be
Clean.
garbage collected.
Interesting.
I'll never be able to say that rude word about it, but I don't know why I can't say that tonight.
You can read it, but you can't say it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There's
speaking
no
of
way.
rude,
That's like a tongue twister word. I think that word is like Latin and it means cannot be spoken.
What'd you say, speaking of rude?
speaking of rude, I was just going to talk about the next section, which is intermittent bugs.
Yeah, these aren't fun.
And that's when something works right 9 out of 10 times, but that 10th time, which is probably going to be, in the big demo to your board of directors, it's a big deal, and so it's going to crash and do bad things. And those are so horrible to track down. and includes things like race conditions or maybe specific setups or specific data. And that can be such a nightmare. And those are the kind of things that can, keep you up to 2 in the morning and have no measurable progress made.
Right. Or maybe it's a load problem, and until you get to a certain size of load, you're not gonna be able to see the problem. So in the meantime, you're like, nope, works on my machine.
Yeah, I mean, he had the perfect example in something that he actually got hit with was they were using some third-party library that did some string manipulation or something. But basically what it boiled down to is it almost never had a problem. But when it did, what it turned out to be was there was a super long string and this thing was quadratic. So, it ate up way more memory than everything else. So when you hit this boundary, it would just crash. And it took them a long time to figure it out. And really the only way to go about this thing is to put good logs in place.
And definitely it's horrible when you don't have logs or something like this. So there's something that's happening, you can't reproduce it, and there's no signs of it at all. Just makes me want to put my head down and cry.
The one thing, though, that wasn't mentioned in this section that I was actually a little shocked about, because it definitely was one that this is always my go-to. The first thought that goes through my head whenever I deal with a problem this is like, okay, what's new? What has recently changed?
Right.
And is that in any way related? And that wasn't, one of the options that he discussed.
That's a really good point. I mean, that's kind of how we figured out that we fell out of iTunes for a little while, right? I mean, we literally had to just bang our heads against the wall and say, all right, hold on a second. What changed?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in his example that he gave with that third-party library that they affectionately referred to as the French stripper. I loved that name for it.
Yes.
It was software made in France that stripped HTML tags from text.
Yep.
But I mean, that might not have applied in his situation, but certainly in a lot of situations I've seen, that has been a good starting point, at least, is to say,
Right.
to ask yourself, like, what's new here?
Absolutely. The next section I thought was pretty good, and that is how to learn design skills. And
This is written before Bootstrap, by the way.
Is this CSS?
no, this is not CSS.
This might be before CSS, actually.
Yeah,
Come on, man. 2002 wasn't that long ago.
I mean, this one's kind of cool. This is how to design software, and they say design skills, and nowadays we think of design a little bit differently. You hear design, you're like, okay, who made the website look that way? No, this is talking about basically
Why is the logo on fire?
how do you put together a solid piece of software? How do you put together a nice product at the end? And one of the things that they talk about is go sit with a mentor, somebody who's been there and done it. Watch them, follow them, tag along, see what they do, and then pick it up. Start doing it yourself. Take a small project and work through it.
Yeah, and I also wanted to mention the book, Don't Make Me Think. It's really nice. It's really short. It's got some really good examples, and we'll have a link to that in the resources we like.
Yeah, there were a couple quotes in this section that I liked, though. That one is that design is a matter of judgment that takes years to acquire. Right?
Yeah, you really need to respect your UI and UX people. It's hard, and I know I for sure can't do it.
Well, I didn't even take it that way. Like, because I was joking about CSS, but when in this section when we were talking about design skills, I took this more to mean like software design architecture.
Yes.
Like,
Okay.
not just visually design. So, I kind of took that statement as like, take how to say this, like your peers that have been either working in this framework that have more experience in this framework, or maybe they've just been, working period longer than you have, there's things that you could learn from them, and they might have judgments around design for specific reasons based on that experience. So, you could learn something from them. So I thought that was an interesting one. And then another one that he says is, don't become dogmatic about particular design styles.
Yes, I agree
Right.
with that.
And I thought, yeah, that's a good one too. Like, don't get stuck in your ways.
Design is an art, not a science.
Yeah.
And that's true. I mean, if you think about it, like when you go to build your application, you've heard of, what's it called? Domain driven design, to where you think about your business and department. So you have your customer service and you have your accounting, you have this kind of thing, right? Do you build your software that way? Do you build everything in layers? Do you have a database tier? Then do you have some sort of REST tier on top of that? Like there's tons of things, and that's why they say don't become dogmatic about it. There's so many different ways to do it, and they all have their pros and cons. So it's worth watching what other people do and experiment yourself, right?
You know what's interesting too is a lot of times teams will have like a style, and so if you say work on a small team for a number of years and it's in the same framework, then you can kind of develop patterns that aren't necessarily the best. And I think it's kind of funny if you like switch jobs or maybe switch teams or switch projects. A lot of times you'll get some fresh ideas. You'll see people solving similar problems in different ways. And sometimes it's better and sometimes it's not, and you can kind of update that. But it is interesting always just to see how other people solve problems, and you don't want it to deny yourself that experience if you don't say work with a large team or don't get out there much.
Yeah. So the last section in this, the personal skills part was how to conduct experiments.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty good. I mean, the big takeaway for me there was just having a hypothesis, and I think it's good. It's one thing to just kind of refresh and click around and see if anything interesting happens, and it's another to say, all right, I did this, and this should happen, and then if it doesn't, then you've got somewhere to go and somewhere to think about and try to figure out what you think of that's incorrect. What of your base case scenarios, which thing you are assuming to be a fact is not.
Yeah, I mean, one of the kinds of experiments that he gets in is talking about testing with small examples. It reminded me of like unit testing.
It's very similar to that.
I mean, like basically his description there, how did he word it? Testing systems with small examples to verify that they conform to the documentation or to understand their response when there is no documentation. I'm like, well, that's pretty much like a unit test, right? Like you're confirming that it does what it's supposed to do. Yeah. And there were little things like that. Like a lot of these were like that, testing small code changes to see if they actually fix a bug. Right. Like we've talked about, writing unit tests just to see the bug so that the test fails, and then keep coding, until that test passes. Right.
Yep.
So I thought that was interesting.
All right. So it's now that time of the episode where I'm going to beg. Please, if you haven't already and you're enjoying the show, it's awesome that you guys come up and leave our comments on our episodes, and please do come join us at Slack. But if you want to really have a heart, go up to codingblocks.net/review and click on either iTunes or Stitcher and just leave us, even a one-liner or something. Some of what we do is just one-lines, but if you do that, that would greatly help us out. It helps us get in front of more people, and we really enjoy doing this, and that is just a small way of repaying us for the time that we take to do this. So if you would, please do that. We would greatly appreciate it. And as mentioned before, we'll give you a shout out here in the episodes.
And there have been listeners that have specifically installed the applications necessary to leave that review, and I can't tell you like how much I appreciate that.
Yeah. Seriously.
The fact that you took not only the time to leave the review, but you went out of your way to install an application or two, as it might have been for some, like that's awesome. And I can't thank you enough for that.
And if you're like me and you truly hate iTunes, like that's special. Like that you actually deserve a badge for that.
Wow.
Because I really hate iTunes, but unfortunately it's the only way to actually leave a review is to go in there and do it, unless you have an iPhone. So yeah, if you would, please do head over to codingblocks.net/review and drop us a one-liner up there, or if you want to make it longer, we read them and we love them. So please do that.
This episode is sponsored by Infragistics. The Internet of Things, mobility, and connected systems are driving the need for big data solutions that are imperative to help your users and customers make better decisions faster than ever before. Experts in data visualization, Infragistics developer tools drive custom app development for any data visualization scenario on any platform. And Report Plus is an enterprise-ready, self-service BI dashboard solution that opens up your enterprise big data for end-user consumption. Now head over to www.infragistics.com and get your free trial today.
All right. So before we get back into the next section, which, what is that next section? Team skills. I wanted to go over which series is more often. So in the last episode, the survey that was asked was, which series is more awesome? Is it Star Wars or is it Star Trek? And if you recall, the last episode, that was during the Star Wars season, right? So, the movie was coming out, it was fresh on everyone's mind, and it was Star Wars season. Like, everybody was celebrating Star Wars, right? Which one? Now, you haven't cheated, have you, this time?
So I haven't gone and looked at the results.
Okay.
But I saw some emails trickling in. So
Hold on.
I feel like programmers are going to be Star Trek. Sorry.
Okay, so Joe's taking the Star Trek side. Alan's taking
the Star Trek
side.
That's not my choice, but that's what I feel most people chose.
Wait, what?
Jar Jar Binks.
That's not your choice?
That's not my choice for what I would have picked.
But
I think what the majority
I'm
picked was Star Trek.
Okay, well, let me ask you this then. Since you both picked the same one, you want to narrow it down. Put a number to it. And since it was two choices, which percentage do you think? Where do you think it landed?
65-35.
65 Star Trek, 35 Star Wars.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, 35 for Star Wars only because of AT-ATs and Star Destroyers.
Wait, what was that number?
35 for Star Wars.
So you're both going 65-35.
Apparently.
Yep.
Oh, you guys aren't really being fun about playing this because there's supposed to be like a winner, and I'll go ahead and tell you, neither one of you are it. It was Star Wars.
Really?
And here's the most interesting part. Somebody put that Wookiee back in the cage. You both went with 65-35. It was 69-31.
Wow.
Did I say that right? 61-39.
61-39. Okay, so I wasn't far off on the percentage. Just had them flipped.
Yeah, you had them in the wrong order.
Wow, I really thought Star Trek was going to win that one.
Now, here's the question. Do you think that most people voted Star Wars only because of all the recent hype because the movie was out?
Yeah.
Like, if the next Star Trek movie was coming out in 2 days, that the hype would be around Star Trek.
Well, when the next Star Trek movie comes out, we're rerunning the survey.
There you go.
Right?
Yeah, you know what? The thing is, Star Trek doesn't get hyped as much because it's for more rational and logical people. So it doesn't have that huge kind of wave.
Like there's some jabs.
Are you trying to say I'm irrational?
I'm just saying there might be, a difference in average IQ between the two.
Wow. Wow.
Jar Jar Binks.
Please don't stop listening.
Listen, Jar Jar Abrams did a good job of directing that last movie.
Wow.
Nice.
All right. All right. So let's get into team skills.
So why is estimation important?
It's not. I hate it.
I just let the architect do it.
Oh God! Really?
All right.
So, I mean, I get why it's important. It's important for people that make plans. It's important for project managers and bosses and people who have to report to boards of directors and the public. Why it's important to programmers is because, we don't want to look stupid, and we also don't want to look like we're slacking or like we're stupid for not being able to get things done.
Well, I can go even better than that, though. Like, you want to make your boss happy. Your boss wants to make his boss happy. Your boss's boss wants to make his boss, etc., until you ultimately make the company happy, the customer happy. So part of your making your boss happy is being able to provide an estimate.
Right.
And it being something realistic. Like if you tell him you're going to have something done, a new feature done by a certain time, then, you want to live up to that.
Well, if I recall, our buddy John might have estimated 6 months on one thing and had it done in a day.
Well, there's also been the opposite, something was like, 5 days and
Right.
it might have taken
3 months.
6 months. But those things happen, right? Like, and that's why there was a great quote in here about he says the fact that it is impossible, both theoretically and practically, to predict accurately how long it will take to develop software is often lost on managers.
And it really is. I mean, he even goes on with another quote that I loved. I estimate that if I really understand the problem, it is about 50% likely that we will be done in 5 weeks if no one bothers us during that time. What this really means is I promise to have it all done 5 weeks from now. That's what it gets translated to in your manager's mind.
Well, really, but put some context around that quote, because I liked that quote too. He was saying that, like, when let's say that I'm your manager, right, and I come up to you and I'm asking you to give me a quote on something. The tendency is to think wishfully. Right. And that's where that first quote about, I estimate that if I understand the problem, it's like 50% likely, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Like you're thinking wishfully that that's what's going to happen. And you're even putting there, like, if no one bothers me during that time, there's so many assumptions in there. Like, if I really understand the problem, right, that it's 50% likely that it's going to be done.
There,
right? No, not halfway done. It's
halfway confident that it will be done.
I'm either going to have it done in 5 weeks or I'm not.
Right.
It's binary.
Right.
And then there's the assumption that no one's going to bother me during this time. Like, I'm going to shut the door, lock it, and turn off all social platforms. No one's going to be able to contact me. Like, that's never going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key takeaway to this entire thing is, why is it actually important? There's a couple, right? Your manager needs to be able to report to his boss that they have a plan for when something can be done, and that's key. But then the other two is so you build trust with the people that you're working with.
Oh, somebody's skipping ahead.
Well, that's part of it, right? Like, I mean, you don't want to sandbag too much, because then people will know, and you don't want to fall behind. Unfortunately, as programmers, we know that you run into brick walls that you just can't anticipate, right? Like, it just happens. And that's why it's so difficult, but it is important, because you want people to know what your plan is and what you can, realistically have done.
Right.
Yeah, there is an incentive there to give a shorter answer. You don't want to be the guy that says, "Oh, it's going to take probably a couple days to add that button," even though that, my teammate added a similar button in an hour, because things are different. And, sometimes you spend 4 hours trying to figure out why your computer keeps restarting, and it happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the problem, as he puts it, is that, like, if you're going to, say that wishful estimate, right, then that requires that you explicitly discuss that with your boss, so that you can say, like, listen, I don't know if you caught all of those assumptions, but let's iterate through them one by one and make sure that we are on board with what this means, right? Like,
right.
I'm only 50% confident that I'm going to make it in 5 weeks, and that's if I understand this thing. And, if no one's going to bother me, right? Like, as nothing else is going to come up in the next 5 weeks for me, right?
Right.
Well, I have 2 more questions for you guys.
Yeah.
The first is, have you ever had a boss change the goal line on you?
Oh, never.
Change the feature.
What?
Why would anybody ever do that?
That never happens. That only happens in movies.
That's right. Yeah, it happens all the time. People who ask for something don't know exactly what they want, or what they want changes kind of over time, or as things get closer. And so you've estimated on something that you're not doing anymore, and now you're working on something completely different.
Well, I think the term for that, though, is scope creep.
Yeah, I was going to say affectionately known as scope creep. What was your second question?
What do you do if your boss asks you for an estimate on a large task?
Okay, so this leads into the very next section, how to estimate programming time. And the thing that I love the most, was his honest response was, if you're asked to do something big, stall.
Yeah.
Yep.
I loved that statement.
Here's the thing, right?
And he says it's the most honest thing you can
It's
do.
true. It's absolutely true. I'm actually going to give an example. So we had Vlad Hribak on the show months ago. I don't remember what the episode was, but he was the
9.
one that did
Oh,
Aspectacular.
yeah. That was, I was going
9.
to say 6. Was it 9?
So we were all working on this huge project at the time that was, we were trying to scope it out. And when I say huge, like this thing was going to span anywhere from 6 months to a year. Nobody had any idea. And the problem is everybody was trying to figure out how much time is this going to take. And here's the biggest problem as a program, and we all run into it. You don't know. You can make all the speculations in the world, even being a super experienced guy, until you get in and start iterating towards it. You don't even know the kind of stuff you're going to run into. And that's what he did. So while everybody else was trying to plan out, okay, well, we're going to need at least this much time for this or whatever, he was like, you know what, let me just start tearing it apart and see what happens. Right? And so that's why the stall thing's so important. While he was able to start iterating towards it, he was able to come up with a better estimate. So stalling in the beginning, he couldn't give a good answer. But as he got in and started feeling what the pieces were like, then he could actually realistically say, hey, look, man, it took me this much time to do this one section. All right. I know that we have 20 other sections. If I were to extrapolate out, I can tell you that it's going to be at least this much time.
Yeah. And the author here, he specifically points out, that while stalling, you could possibly consider doing or prototyping the task itself, which is exactly what you're describing here.
Yep.
Except that actually happened, and there's a lot of benefit to that, to both the author's point and to Alan's point there with that story. Is that you get like a real world experience of like whatever that implementation of that task is, right? That can then be used as a data point to help later. Now, I have had situations though where the initial prototype or whatever, the part that was initially picked just at random happened to be, an easy one in disguise.
Right.
And, that's then thrown off the estimate, because then you prototype that one, not realizing at the time, not knowing that it just happened to be easier than others that you thought were just like it. And then you base your estimate off of that first one. And then as you get into it, you're like, oh my God, wait a minute. These other scenarios are so much more difficult. I've had that happen.
Well, I will say along those lines, though, I've worked with some really good project managers in the past, and the whole thing is, if you think that it's going to take longer, let me know sooner rather than later, right? Like what you don't want to be doing is you've scoped this thing out to be 6 months. You base that off that simple task that you had at the front of it. And then all of a sudden here you are, you're 5 months in, and now you're like, man, there's no way we're going to get this done. Whereas if 3 months in you had said, you know what, that first one we did was a softball. Like we knocked that one out. But then these other ones that we've started on have really set us back. You're only halfway in at that point. If you can somehow set expectations and talk to your manager, they can then go to bat for you, right? Now, that's not saying that it's going to get moved, but at least if you do constant communication where you let people know along the way where you're at, people are way more receptive to it, other than, wait, you've been hiding this from me and now you're going to tell me at the very end that you're not going to get it done?
You have to communicate.
Yes, and that is...
Yeah, this is not a technical problem, and that's why it's under the team skills section. This is communication. You need to communicate early and often, raise the flags, and you need to constantly be setting expectations to the people you're working with so that they aren't surprised.
Yeah, and I really liked, he went into things like, programming's part of what we do. But then there's documentation, there's other things. And he said, give visibility into what you're spending time on, right? If you're spending 2 times more time on documenting than you actually thought, you need to let the people know that.
Right.
Don't
like if it's going to take you twice as long to document than it is going to be to code, then you need to let your boss know as part of your estimate, here's what the estimate is, and here's where the breakdown of that. And this part is going to be the documentation so that it's clear to everybody.
Absolutely. And, there was another thing that I found I think it was towards the end of this, that I loved, and we've all done it. When you estimate, you typically are estimating based off your knowledge and
Oh,
off
right.
your skill set.
Yeah.
And it's easy to do because you know your knowledge, you know your skill set. But if you have a team of people with different experience levels, you can't assume if you're an expert programmer that everybody's going to work as fast as you. And so if you have a few people on the team that maybe aren't as familiar with the product or whatever, you can't say, "Hey, it's going to take 2 weeks," assuming that everybody's working at your level
Right.
when you got people that obviously are going to be slower, and that's hard to do.
Right. Yeah. It's funny because I had that same quote highlighted that the strong programmer estimates based off of his or her skill, and then a weaker programmer is assigned the task
And held to
and
that
held
estimate.
to that estimate.
Yeah.
And then it's like, but because he also goes into like padding your estimates too, and that you should explicitly pad them. Right? Don't implicitly pad it, but explicitly pad the estimate.
Yep.
And that's part of what you're communicating is that, like, hey, I'm gonna explicitly give myself a couple of days, 1 or 2 extra days, just in case, and here's why.
And
Right?
there was vacation time, there was sick time, there was
That was when you're on a grander scale. Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
but that's what they were saying. They said, write it out. Don't just say. I was actually on a project one time where they were going to let a consultant go because he wanted to take a vacation in the middle of this project. And it's like, wait a second, you didn't think that anybody in the middle of summertime was going to want a vacation?
Right.
Really?
Yeah, but I mean, he even talks about it, padding it explicitly and communicating that even for the smaller tasks. So yeah, you're right. Definitely, if you're doing this for like a team, then you need to take that into consideration. But even if it's just something for you yourself that you're being asked to estimate, like how long is this going to take you to do, and if you are, if you want to pad that, then you need to make that padding known.
Yes.
Right. And that goes back to your point too about building trust, right? So that as a developer, there's this trust between you and your manager. Like he knows, hey, if Alan says that it's going to take 3 days to do this, then it's going to take 3 days to do this. And if he says, hey, it's going to take 3 days, but just in case if I run into some problems, there may be an extra day or so, then that's establishing that trust that, like, hey, I can really rely on like that estimate, that quote that he's given me.
It's goodwill. And as a developer, that's hard to do because you run into, I mean, Outlaws joked about CSS. I know Joe's run into this as well. But sometimes you get that problem that seems like it's a 5-minute thing. And then 5 hours later, you're sitting there going, why is this a thing? Why is this a problem? Right? So it's very, very difficult. I don't want to, I want people to understand estimation is tough. It is very hard. And sometimes it's even worse when you give an estimate and then you have to backpedal, but you need to have open communication.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is that, I'm sorry, Joe.
All good.
The problem is that these quotes, these estimates that you give, they become deadlines.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the rise of Agile really reflects that thought. Waterfall didn't work. Planning things out so rigidly just didn't work. And so, we're basically, the industry as a whole has been working towards getting things to work in smaller batches. And so we can kind of control those variables a little bit more because it's easier to say, I think this is going to be 4 hours than to say, I think this is going to take us 4 months. There's less risk involved when it's a smaller estimate.
Right.
Although it does mean more estimating, I guess, daily or weekly or sprintly.
But that kind of brings up another thing real quick that's I don't even think was mentioned in here is that really brings out the need for people to think about iterating towards something as opposed to I have this huge project, right? I want you to scope this entire massive project out. Start building it up, right? Start thinking in pieces and start building towards it because you can get way more done. And let's be honest, if you can get little pieces in front of people more frequently, they feel more comfortable about it. If you tell somebody you're going to have something done in a year and a half,
Right.
and it's going to take you this much time, people are going to lose confidence because they're not going to see this thing.
Well, I guess this is part of the popularity and the ultimate win for Agile versus Waterfall, right?
Absolutely.
So the next section is how to find out information.
I like this section. I like some of his insights here.
This is pre-Stack Overflow, by the way.
It really was. This was pre a lot of things that we use nowadays. But
according to you guys, man, this thing might have well been before the internet.
oh man, this
Like
was
we were coding on stone tablets, and
these were back with T-Rexes.
oh my god,
This is
No,
before
it-
Fitbit, man.
It was before Fitbit.
before iPhone.
So
Ah,
one of the things that he said, and I still think there's a lot of truth to this, although there's way more resources available now, but a lot of people, their first inclination is go search the web. He's like, if you were looking for solid information, go to the library and get a book, or go buy the book.
what?
So here, the best way I know how to describe this is try and figure out how to set up Apache on Linux. All right. Go search on Google, and after you get back 10 billion results, I don't even know if it's
Yeah.
even that little, and they all are different, then you're going to be frustrated because you're going to be chasing your tail. You're going to get bits and pieces of stuff everywhere, and you're not going to know what you did. If you go buy a book, then you're going to have one author explain from beginning to end how he set it up. And so at least you have a resource you could go back to if you need to figure it out again, right? So I think there's a lot of value to having a reference that you can go back to consistently. And that's one thing I like about the book.
RTFM.
Oh God, don't.
Yeah, I mean, he specifically says though, like you were talking about searching the internet, right? And he was talking about avoiding that for like opinionated, or subjective type of information, right? Because
Right.
you're not going to get you're going to get 10,000 answers, like your point about Apache, right? But it did remind me of not a quote, I guess, but like I don't. Albert Einstein is quoted as saying something that he really didn't. It was just his actual words were I don't know, changed. But there's this I don't know what else to call it, but a quote. This statement that supposedly Albert Einstein said that says never memorize what you can look up in books. Now the actual statement that he said was that I do not carry such information in my mind since it is readily available in books. The value of a college education is not the learning of many facts, but the training of the mind to think. And so I thought about that statement while I was reading the section, and I thought it was interesting.
Well, can you imagine, a scrum in the morning and your boss asks for your stats and you're like, well, I ran into a problem with Apache. So I went to Barnes & Noble and I got a book in chapter 2. So,
Well,
stalled on
okay.
this project for a week.
But books today are far different, right? Like you can go online for
was
most of
gonna
the
say,
stuff.
yeah.
Like you're not going into a
He'd
brick
be
and
like,
mortar store.
Yo, moron, why'd you drive all the way down there? You could have just downloaded it on your Kindle, right?
Right.
I mean,
Or your Nook, since he mentioned Barnes and Noble.
right.
Equal opportunity. Because Nook is a big deal. A lot of people.
It used to be. Is it still?
I don't. It still is. Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. This one was pretty interesting. The other thing I liked about it at the very end was, and we've all been there, right? Where you have this thing, and you're like, man, and you're waffling on it. You've gathered more information than you could ever possibly consume, and you're still waffling on it. And he basically closes with, use your gut.
Right.
You make a decision at some point. Like there's a point to where you have to quit thinking about it. There's do it or get off the pot, basically. Make the decision and move on. And you got to feel good about it.
Yeah, I have a friend that's done that. Like he's read everything there was about the Surface Pro 4, right? And knows all about it. And he's like so badly wants it, but he hasn't dropped the hammer to buy it.
Man, whatever.
So oh, did you know who I was talking
Actually, it
about?
wasn't the Surface Pro 4. It's the Surface Book.
Well, it changed when the Surface Book came out. Yeah, so you know that guy.
I've heard of him. He told me it was a Surface Book, and he just wasn't. Yeah, whatever.
So this next section was kind of scary to me. How to utilize people as information sources.
Yeah.
We've talked about this before.
So the one thing that he starts off with saying though is that you have to be respectful, respect your own time, but also you have to respect the other person's time too. Right? Like that's key.
Yeah, I worked with a guy once who he would always say, "I've never gotten any training in this." And as you know, for programming, there usually isn't some sort of training. There's no 1 week program I can send you to teach you how to do what I do. But he was constantly coming to with like really minor problems, and it would always be, "No one's trained me how to do this. No one's showed me how to do this." I'm like, I don't know. It's setting variables and then using them. Like, what is there to train you on? Like, I'm sorry, you just got to kind of struggle through it.
One thing I liked about this is, so what you just said, I would have gone crazy. One thing that this guy wrote in here that I really liked was the amount of time you spend talking to each person in your organization depends on their role more
Right.
than their position. And that's important. Like people a lot of times will think, well, the VP, I can't eat up his time. That may not be it. It might just be your direct manager who's involved in a lot of things. And so their time is very important. So you can't just suck it up. And they say you should talk to your boss more than your boss's boss, but you should talk to your boss's boss a little.
Right.
And that's very important. And a lot of people miss this. A lot of people don't want to get involved at that level. But if you ever want visibility and you want to understand more than just the task you're working on, that can be key to a lot of things.
But the way I also took this too, though, about the role instead of the title was that, you may have a coworker who technically has the exact same title that you have, but yet that person, for whatever reason, they're acting in a capacity that's greater than, that's really above what that title is. But for whatever reason, they have the same job title that you have. Right. And so, that's a person that you should take, you should talk to differently than someone else, right? Like you should value that person's time, right? Because they're, I don't know how else to say it, but other than, they're doing more, for the team.
And that's true. I mean, that happens anywhere you go. There's certain people that have those types of tasks. They also take it down a notch too. They say, hey, if you're working with interns, this is important. Interns, if you've ever worked with any, and I know I have, I'm sure you guys both have, they can be a time drain. But here's the thing. Everybody has to start somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And all you can try and do as a mentor, and it's your job as a mentor to instill a certain level of, look, dude, I want you to go spend your due diligence and try and figure out everything you can before you come back to me, right? I don't care if that's an hour from now or a day from now. I want you to go do it, and I want you to give it a good effort. Now, when you come back to me, I expect to have something in front of me to look at, right? When you do it, I may tell you that that's not a great solution, but it's an opportunity to learn. And if that intern took that initiative and came to you and spent the time on their own to go figure it out, now it's your job as the mentor to say, excellent, I like what you did. It's not perfect. Let me show you how I can improve this or how you can improve this. And then, so instead of it becoming a constant him coming to you or she coming to you and asking nonstop questions, make them do something and then show them how to improve it and then tell them why. And then that way you kind of reduce the amount of time that they're eating up of yours, but both of you are getting something out of it, because this guy might turn into a rock star or this girl might turn into a rock star, right? So you're investing in them, hoping that it will pay off in the future.
Yeah. I mean, there was another point that he made here, which was that when you're, talking to the, your teammates and someone is using you as an information source, let's say, for example, or vice versa, each person is learning something about the other one, right? Like as the person answering the question for information, right? Like that person's learning like, oh, this is what that person knows, and I can go to that person anytime I have this question. And as the person who's doing the answering, then you know that like, oh, well, this is the type of questions that this guy's going to come at me with, or male, female, whatever. This person is going to come to me with either like really strong, good, well thought out questions, or basic questions. But the value of that. Of those interactions can diminish the more often it's done.
Right.
Right.
Totally.
And so, so that's part of like you have to respect that, right? And yeah, so I thought that was a very important point.
Yeah, I used to work with a guy named Jim, and it was always just so much easier to go ask him your question than it was to even Google, because he had the context, he knew the kind of stuff you were working on, so everyone would just kind of line up by Jim's door. This is a small company too, and so the company actually instituted, they called it open gym hours, where you were allowed to bug Jim from like 10 to noon every day, but then you had to leave him alone so he could get some work done too. And it was it was awesome because Jim was awesome, but it was also pretty bad that I would end up going to him to solve my problems rather than spending a little bit more time and learning about whatever it was and kind of moving on. But just thought that was kind of interesting.
Well, here's what Jim could learn from is how to document wisely.
Well, hold on.
Oh.
Before we go there, wait. Yeah, before we go there, one other thing that I really liked in here was, as a developer, speak to people that aren't necessarily just your boss. So one thing that I really liked is that he mentioned that, hey, if you have access to the head of sales,
Oh,
right? You're working on this product. You kind of know what this product does, but getting somebody else's perspective on how this thing is sold or what it's being used for or how it's being used can be super valuable to how you think about things as a developer. So don't always just think about your direct report or who you're reporting to or whoever they report to. If you have access to other people that are willing to share information, keep some open ears, right? Listen to them, and you will learn, even if it's just one little thing, you'll learn stuff that may be invaluable to you as a developer and maybe even to your team.
yeah, I liked that comment. It was kind of like just watching how stakeholders in other parts of the company work and operate, and then give you more insight. So yeah, it was a good one. So moving on to how Jim can learn to document wisely. Sorry, Jim. Yeah, I loved like the first statement he makes here. Life's too short to write crap nobody will read.
Right.
Roger
Yeah,
that.
I do like that. It gets stale so fast. I mean, you make changes to the code every day. It's a torture to keep up with documentation.
It can be, for sure.
I do like documenting the reasons behind doing things, especially when if you're doing something that's a little bit strange or unintuitive. You can kind of write little comments about what the purpose is, whether it's a hack, whether there's a really good reason, whether you're meaning to change it in the future, whatever it is. I like that sort of stuff.
There was one important point though that I thought that he made here, and that is that writing good. This is his quote. Writing good documentation is first of all good writing.
Yeah, but following up with that, and I think this might even be more important, if not on the same level, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Basically, if you would come by and read this documentation and be like, really? Really?
Right.
And you're sitting there yelling at the documentation, don't be that guy. Write documentation as if it was going to be you visiting this thing and say, okay, that was helpful. I understand this, right? Don't, if you at least think about what you would want to get out of it and you put it in there, even if you're not the best writer on the planet, that can be helpful.
Right.
Yeah, and as far as documentation too, it's really nice to not need documentation. Like, for example, one thing that's better than having a documentation about how to set up your dev environment is having a script that does it for you, or having good variable and method names and having your code properly factored.
That's a great point.
He does go on to mention the importance of self-explanatory code, but there was another great quote in here that I want to read that he says, which is that the documentation, if not written perfectly, can lie.
Yes.
And that is 1,000 times worse.
Yes.
And when I read that, I was like, that is such a true statement, because how many times have you ever read bad documentation? And it might not even be for your own, so it could be for third-party stuff. And you'll read that documentation, and you're like, oh, okay, so all I got to do is X, Y, and Z, right? Oh, wait a minute. I know I'm about to get Alan right here, because I can give you a prime example. Anyone that has ever in the history of the internet worked with PayPal's API can back me up that is some horrible, horrible documentation,
Preach on.
right? And it's so contradictory in like different sections that you read. Like, yeah, that is a great example of just awful documentation.
It is not clear. And here's the other thing too. So he talks about coding documentation, right? Like documenting your code and why you should not do it. And this goes to what he just said about it can lie. Your code should be readable. And most programmers can get it. The only time you should put documentation in your code is if you're putting a comment as to why something weird is happening. Why you're doing some odd thing in there. Otherwise, it should be self-documenting, because if you start trying to document your code and then you have this other documentation and they end up conflicting, you don't know what the truth is. And that becomes a big problem.
Well, even worse. And in fact, this is kind of funny because I just ran into this today.
Oh, you read one of
Where-
my comments in code?
No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't yours. But I was reading through some code from another developer, and there was a comment in the code that was no longer true.
Ah, yeah.
And so the problem with writing overly verbose comments in your code is that, whoa, sorry about that, is that as you go through refactoring it, it's we have tools that can easily refactor the code, but oftentimes those tools don't touch the comments at all.
Right.
So now you have these codes that are, or these comments in the code that are no longer relevant,
Misleading.
well, or completely misleading. Yeah.
That's the problem. If you read something, you're going to assume that it's true, right? I mean, that's going to be your assumption unless you get bit too many times or bitten too many times. So, yeah.
So, which is a great segue into how to work with poor code.
Whoa. Now, I take major umbrage with this title, if nothing else, because it's all bad code. Sometimes there's worse code.
Well, I like there've been a couple I think even a Twitter follower that we got a while back had a statement like, for their little Twitter status or whatever, how the slogan for that user. I don't know what Twitter calls that. What do they call
Your
that?
byline, maybe?
Yeah, okay, fine, your byline. He had something along the lines of writing tomorrow's legacy code today.
Yeah, I love that.
Yes,
Right?
That's awesome.
And it's so true, right? Like, so your point about like it's all poor code. Yeah, I mean, it's the greatest thing. Like that code that you're writing right now that you're so proud of, that project, it is amazing code right now, and tomorrow it won't be.
Well, the funny part about this is we've talked about solid and dry and all that. and Joe went through and tried to torture himself and do a completely solid application at one point. And you end up with like 9 bajillion interfaces and whatever. And here's the thing, right? Like that's not even good because nobody can ever follow it. And so there's a fine line between what's good code and what's poor code. And a lot of times it's opinionated. Like I'm friends with a guy who I would consider a very competent programmer, very good.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I'll never forget at one point, like, this guy's all about patterns and good programming sense and all that. And he was like, too much abstraction makes for bad code. And I was like, this coming from this guy? Really?
Right.
And it's because it becomes very difficult to follow. Yeah, you're following all the best patterns and all the best practices out there, but it's impossible to read and it's impossible to get from point A to point B. And, elegant code, but is it poor? Right?
But let's take the example of let's assume that that's not what the author meant.
right. I don't think that's what he meant.
And let's assume that you're actually looking at just some horrible code, right? And the point that he's trying to get at here, though, is that, you weren't there at the time that was developed.
Right.
You don't know the circumstances. You don't know the skill set of the person who is doing the development. You don't know the time pressure that the person was under when doing the development. You don't know the political pressures within the company of when that development was happening. So, there's so many unknowns that for you to come in and be judgmental about it after the fact, it's kind of,
Yeah, don't throw
Yeah.
stones.
Don't bother, because you know what? Somebody else is going to have to come back to your code and do the same thing.
I love it because both you and Joe, like if I've ever had to inherit something you're working on, like the first thing
God.
I'll hear is, "Look, I'm not proud of this."
Yeah. Like, here it is, and here are my asterisks and conditions and caveats.
Oh, dude, by the way,
Here are the set of tickets that I have set aside for myself to later go back and refactor that.
look, man, I will be honest. I've never worked behind anybody like I have behind Joe. This dude will totally document all the pitfalls of everything that's happened and be like, "Look, dude, here's the things to look out for. These are the things that I know exist, and this is the kind of stuff you have to be aware." Like, dude, he'll have an entire document of, "All right, man, I know that I'm not working on this anymore, and I'm sorry that you have to, but
Let me
here's-
count the ways that I'm
yeah.
sorry.
Here's my cliff notes of what you're gonna have." And dude, it's actually kind of amazing because it's a good reference. I think you even talked about this at some point as having like a handoff document, right? And
Oh, yeah.
Oh, right.
it's been a while back, but you know, again, to his point though, you really don't know. You know,
We should do a talk on like neuroses and anxiety as pros of being a programmer.
You mentioned the abstraction, and I think you also mentioned encapsulation. Those were two things though that the author called out as like two of a programmer's best tools. I thought that was an interesting way to categorize those.
Well, here's an interesting thing. And so too much abstraction is just insanity. But one of the cool parts is, especially programmers coming out of college, like you're not really taught interfaces properly. And we talked about this way back in our IS for Interfaces thing. But I remember going to some conferences at one point, and security was one of the big talks. And they say, how do you make something secure that's not secure? You start abstracting things away by introducing interfaces, and that way you can plug things in that will make them more secure. So you can create classes that can kind of hot swap out what was there. And so that is how abstraction can help out, and encapsulation as well. You know, you're not leaking global variables out, and you know, you can start fixing problems slowly by going through.
So let's move on to one of my favorite topics here. How to use source code control.
By the way, Subversion version 1 came out in 2004.
Oh man. Man, hey, look, I use the heck out of some Subversion. Anything to get away from Visual Source Safe.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I was all on board with.
Man, I was a fan of Visual Source Safe back in the day. I don't know why you're hating on it.
I hated Source Safe. I never liked Source Safe, as a matter of fact. I'll never forget some places that I did work with, they were like checking all your code at the end of the day, whether it's working or not. And it was like, so that means when I go to check out tomorrow, this thing ain't going to work. But they're like, but if you keep it checked out, then everybody's going to be locked out from that file. And it was like, okay.
Yeah,
really?
that was the downside.
Yeah, dude, I hated Source Safe.
It definitely fell on its face for large teams.
I loathed Source
You know,
Safe.
for a beginner programmer though, you really need to understand how, you know, the ins and outs of source code control, and you don't have to get like too incredibly deep into the topic, but I mean the basics of what value it's going to bring to you, and how to use the tool, whatever your platform of choice may be for whatever team you're working with. But you know, you should be able to understand how to use it. That is key.
At least the basics, right? Like, I mean, get the basics down. Even if you're not going into cherry picking and whatever else is available, get the fundamentals. Please get the fundamentals. It will make your life easier and everybody else's as well.
Yeah. I mean, he talks about staying up to date, you know, staying current with whatever the master trunk is for your given repository, and that alone can help you stay away from a lot of conflict type problems just from, you being out of date, right? So just staying current can really help. But he had this other thought in there that I thought was really good, that he says, in regards to source control systems, that they encourage thinking about the code as a growing organic system. And I thought, well, that's really great, especially in today's world of, Mercurial and Git, where, large distributed teams that are working on this thing. And I think specifically we've referred to code as a living, breathing thing before too, right? Maybe back when we were doing the first part of the 12-factor app, so I thought that was great. And, going back to the points that Joe keeps bringing up about how old this thing is, like this was a while. This was back in the days of Visual Source Safe and what was the Rational one? ClearCase? No.
I don't remember what theirs was.
Perforce.
Rational Rose? What was it?
Rose was
Not
for
Perforce.
doing design.
That was designed, but it was by the same company, right?
Yeah, it was all Rational.
Uh,
I think it was ClearCase, wasn't it? I forget. I
there was
hated it.
VCS.
Rhapsody?
There was, I don't remember.
Apex?
No, I don't remember. But my point being is that, like, this was back in the days before
Codebase.
the large distributed repositories exist, like such as Git, for example, and but it was still encouraging you to think about it as a growing organic thing, right?
Yeah, and don't forget to check out episode 3 for our talk on source code etiquette, which really dives into a lot of things about distributed source control.
Was it really that far back? Episode 3?
Yep.
Yeah, that we talked about source control etiquette.
Wow.
Yep.
We've talked about a lot of the things that they talk about in this episode,
Yeah, we really have.
including
Yeah.
unit testing.
And it wasn't ClearCase because that was something else. I don't remember what the Rational tool was for source control.
So, yes, unit test. You want to step us into this one, Joe?
Yeah, so I didn't read this part because I know everything about it already.
Wow.
I'm not kidding.
I mean, I don't know what else to say about this. We've talked about the value of unit testing before. You should definitely do it. Unit testing is awesome. Like, there are times where, especially, I don't know why I feel this way about compiled languages more so than others, but like there are definitely times where, like, I'll be working in some code, and if I can't write unit tests for it, then I don't feel complete. Like, something doesn't feel right.
Well, it's not even typed. I mean, like, even if you go JavaScript or something, you've got a bunch of
There are
task
test
runners and
yep.
that kind of stuff, or test runners,
There,
I mean.
there are testing frameworks out there for that. So I'm not trying to take that away. But my point, though, is that for me personally,
Right.
for some reason, I guess,
You like dot cover is the problem. I think you're in love with dot cover.
well, I mean, I use .cover, but I think I would say that I'm more, I would give that love more to InUnit
InUnit,
than I
okay.
would .cover. But yeah, just the ability to, like, see that yes, this is working. Yes, my confidence is high because look at all these different parameters that I'm testing on. Like, yeah, it builds really good confidence about it. So I don't know what else that could be said about unit testing.
It also informs good design. It keeps your cohesion and coupling down. It forces you to, and it forces you to abstract out your dependencies, or else you're not really unit testing.
I will say one of my favorite books on the topic is The Art of Unit Testing, and it's the examples in the book are specifically in .NET, but all of the concepts, all of the principles, and everything that's discussed in that book, they apply to anything.
Yeah.
They're not just limited to .NET. So I would highly recommend that book, The Art of Unit Testing.
Artofunittesting.com is a site by Roy Osherov, who wrote the book that we're talking about, and it actually has sections for Ruby, C#, Java, and that's it.
Yeah. So let's get into a topic that Alan should learn from, Mr. Beginner. Well, this is take breaks when stumped. So I'll give you a break on that one. That's not the one I was thinking of. I was skipping ahead to the next one. Sorry.
Yeah, but this one's probably a good one too. And this one's just take breaks when stumped.
It really does help.
I can't. It's so simple. I mean, like that's the beauty of this one is its simplicity, but yet it's so true. Like how many times have you been stumped on something and then you're like, you know what? I'm gonna go for a walk. I'm gonna go to lunch. You know, whatever it might be. You step away from the code for some period of time, and when you come back to it, it's just you have this epiphany, and you're like, oh. How did I not notice that before? Here's how I should solve this, or here's what the bug was, or whatever it might be. Like you suddenly see it.
You know, he doesn't mention this, but I would also say try not to code up until you're going to sleep. And this may sound really stupid, but your brain won't relax. Like if you're working on a problem that you don't solve, chances are you are not going to rest well. I mean, at least I don't. Like if I haven't gotten to what I considered to be a good goal, then I literally will stay awake all night dreaming about code. And it's really frustrating, but you know, I mean, even nowadays, sometimes I'll just have to go out and shoot a basketball, you know, to get away from a problem, or, you know, go to lunch, do something to walk away from it, because you're so tied into the problem that you can't, you know, zoom out to 10,000 feet and look at it differently.
You get lost in the weeds. I know that I'm in trouble when I start trying to prove that my language or framework is broken. It's like a little mental switch that happens where suddenly I'm like, no, wait, this isn't me. This is you. This is you, and I'm going to prove it.
Unfortunately, in some cases, that is true.
That's true. Some frameworks more than others.
Yeah. But
right.
that's funny.
So it was bugging me. It was Rational Clear Case.
Oh, okay.
But it had so many different features that revision control or version control was just one of the many.
Right.
Or at least back at the time that this was created. All right. So here's the one that I was thinking of that Alan should learn from: how to recognize when to go home or when to just turn it off and go to sleep. So to your point about not working all the way up until the point that you go to sleep, yeah, you definitely need to give the brain a break. Actually, to that point though, I find that I feel like I'm more productive and able to think more clearly in the mornings than late at night.
I think for me, the late at night is more about less distractions. You know, in the mornings, everybody's, you know, in the office or whatever the case may be. And so there's more people hitting you up for things or whatever. Like the late night stuff usually is just simply, I can focus, right? Like there's very few distractions, and that's probably the big thing for me. But yeah, I mean, what you're referring to is my late night the other night, and that's just, you know, the framework. There's a problem with the framework, and you've done everything you can think of, and I don't know.
No way, man. I think you were just looking for an excuse to stay up till 3 a.m.
But I will say this though, this chapter had some, or not chapter, this section had some really, really great points in it. Like, if you are working at a place that expects you or almost kind of forces you into 60-hour work weeks or greater, you need to really evaluate that, right? I mean, don't get me wrong. As developers, there are going to be those times. There's no question. You got some major deadline coming up, or there's just a particularly challenging thing you're working on. It's going to happen. But if it becomes a norm, that's abnormal. That's unusual. It should not be like that. It's not healthy.
Yeah, I like that. You know, he makes the point of saying that, you know, the sad fact is that you know, for the programming culture, right? It doesn't value mental and physical health very much, which is a crazy statement, because like you kind of want to say, you can kind of make excuses for the physical part, because you're like, yeah, okay, fine. You're sitting behind a desk all day long. Like that one I kind of get, but the mental health one, you think, well, hold on. Like we're constantly studying new subjects, you know, better techniques and languages and you know, concepts. Like that doesn't make sense, except it does when you consider that, you know, we don't give ourselves the rest that we should.
Right.
And then
The pressures.
And then I'm pretty sure it was here where in this section where he was talking about like Oh yeah, it was this section. He was talking about don't abuse caffeine,
Right.
right? Like, I mean, obviously he mentions some, harder drugs too, that you should stay away from to combat fatigue. But I liked the one statement about, don't abuse caffeine because, how many times have you heard programmers talk about like, their favorite caffeinated cola, right? Like, is it Mountain Dew? Is it Jolt? Is it Dr. Pepper? Like those are the three big ones, right? And then that was even before like, now you got drinks like Monster and Red Bull and things like that.
Yeah,
And it's like,
it's a badge of honor now. Like I drank 6 cups of coffee.
right. Yeah. And but that's so true though, because in terms of like your mental health though, like that, it's not helping you.
No, and I mean, we've all worked long hours before. As a programmer, it's going to happen. But he also said if you get to a point of, or if you notice a team member getting to a point to where they're depressed or something like
right.
that, he actually went into more psychological type things that you wouldn't really consider that much. But if you're working under insanely high stress environments and crazy tight deadlines, this stuff is real. And it can be a problem. And that's where communication needs to kick in. But that's also where he says you need to know when to stop, know when to go home. And if it becomes too much of a regular thing, know when to go find another job, right?
Yep. Although I must say that most of my working late usually has to do with failures in other areas like bad estimating or bad debugging skills.
That's true. Estimations would play a key role in that. But bad debugging skills, I don't know, man. Come on.
Yeah, it happens. It's hard. Programming is really, really hard.
It is. And I think a lot of people don't understand that. Getting into it, a lot of people really think it's a cakewalk. They hear, oh, you can make X amount of money just, sitting in front of a computer. How hard can that be? Right. And I don't know.
It's hard enough that essays have to warn you not to take cocaine and not to abuse illegal drugs in order to get your job done.
Isn't that crazy?
But when you were speaking a moment ago, Alan, with knowing when to go home and everything, like at first for a moment there, I thought you were about to say like, and here's a quote from the great Kenny Rogers.
Oh no!
You've got to know
when to hold
them, and you've got to know when to fold them, and you've got to know when to walk away and when to run.
Man, you got to sing this. Come on.
Yeah,
you got to count your.
Oh my God, I was not trying to get that. All right,
George
so
is
while
coming
he
out.
sings,
George is coming out.
That's a perfect segue into this next topic, which is how to deal with difficult people.
Jeez.
Oh, get used to it, man.
All right, hold on.
Programmers are difficult.
Hold on, we're gonna mute Mike real quick.
Wait, what?
Yeah, this. Hey, look. Out of all the sections, this is probably one of the most important and one of the absolute most difficult to deal with. Period. Difficult dealing with difficult people, and that's. I mean, he hits a lot of topics in here, and the crazy part is. His suggestion boiled down to try and stay calm and patient and hear them out.
Yeah, I mean, he does make a great point. Like ultimately, you guys, you have to work together as a team, right? Like it's not going to happen by, you're not going to be able to do it by yourself, right? And, these are people that you have to work with. So you need to, there's some boundaries there, but you need to be able to get along, right?
Yeah.
So I liked that, and but he was also saying like, don't let a bully, someone bully you around either, though, right? Like you should be. I'm trying to say how to say this, like whatever your point is, right? Like you should be strong and commit to that point. Right. But if the team decides that you lose, right, then move on, right? Like accept what the team has decided and, I'm doing a horrible job of that.
Joe, your thoughts?
Yeah, disagree and commit. What's one of the Amazon's leadership principles? Basically, it's kind of similar to what you're saying. Don't be a doormat. Be heard. Get your point across, especially if you believe it's the right thing. But you're a team player, and it's a democracy, or it's some sort of governmental organization, and you just kind of got to make your way. And a lot of times, the arguments that are the fiercest are the ones that the decision actually matters the least. It's because they're both good ideas. And, that's just how it is. So, yeah, you just got to be able to kind of roll with the punches and keep going.
One of the good points he made in here talking about that was difficult people might have good ideas too, right? Like that's one of the challenging things is if you're working with somebody who never listens and is always talking, if that's the type of difficult person you're working with, it's easy to want to shut them down. Right. Sometimes it's difficult not to want to shut them down because you're so tired of not being able to get a word in, edgewise or whatever the case may be. But if you close off your mind that way, you may lose out on some good information. And here's the other thing. Know if you are that person. Try and be introspective of things that you do. Like, I know in my earlier years, I was horrible about wanting to finish other people's sentences. And that was a character flaw that I knew about myself. Like somebody would be talking and I just want to jump in and finish it because I wanted to show how smart I was, right? And a lot of people have that problem. And it's something to be aware of. If, maybe somebody talks to you about it, really sit back and think about it. Okay, how can I be a better communicator? How can I be easier to work with? What can I add to the team? What can I take away from other people on the team? And it's such a balancing act. So, yes, there are difficult people that you work with, but also be aware of things that might make you difficult to work with. So it's really twofold, and it's not easy. If you become a programmer, you're going to work with difficult people, period. Especially because a lot of programmers, not all of them are the most social people in the world. They're not great at communicating. They like working on a computer for a reason, right? Like that's their thing. And so you're going to run into, in this line of profession, probably a bigger variety of people than just about anywhere else.
Right? And as we've said before, it's an opinionated bunch.
It is extremely. And it's because people that survive in this, they're a smart bunch typically. And, we all have strong feelings about certain things. So it can be challenging. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, that's going to be it for this first section of this essay. And we'll have a bunch of links in the show notes for some of the resources we liked. We've mentioned there have been several books that I've mentioned. We'll have the link to this particular book, as well as we mentioned the RD unit testing. There's other ones that this book endorses that we also would agree with. Code Complete, Pragmatic Programmer. All of those will be in the show notes. I don't know if there's any other ones that you guys wanted to specifically call out.
Nah.
Otherwise, then I think it's time we get into Alan's favorite section of the show.
Yes.
Tip of the week.
It's the tip of the week.
Yeah. And I made mine a one-liner so that nobody would actually know what I was talking about.
Oh, man, I was totally going to come in there and webstorm that.
So,
can't believe he called me out on MSDev show as stealing his WebStorm.
You totally did.
Even it went to another show.
Yes, that's right. It traveled with me. I told you, man. You guys weren't showing me love at home.
Oh my God.
All right. So my tip of the week actually has to do with my Kindle. And so I do not like reading articles and books and stuff on my computer. I really don't even like reading that kind of stuff on a tablet, although I will. My Kindle Paperwhite is one of my favorite devices. And here's my tip. So if you find a PDF or a document or something that you want to be able to read and you want to be able to take it with you, download it to your Kindle, a way that you can do that is, okay, so it's not a book on Amazon. You can actually email that file to yourself. or to your Kindle account. So typically, like if your Amazon account is ABC, at gmail.com is your login, then typically your Kindle email account is ABC at kindle.com. And so you can literally just email a document to that email address from an approved email address in your Amazon account settings. So probably whatever you logged in with, and it will ship it to your Kindle device. Now, here's the bigger tip on top of that. So this is a compound tip. If you do just a PDF and you send it, the thing that's really annoying is when it hits your Kindle, it's going to be like a page that you zoom in and out of, just like you would see on a PDF reader on your computer. So you can zoom into 100% or whatever, but you can't scale the font. You can just zoom in on the entire page. If you put the word convert in the subject line when you email that PDF, Amazon will actually convert the thing into a Kindle book for you, or a Kindle format, so you can actually scale your font up and down, and so you can actually have page tracking and all that. And then you can take notes and all that. Otherwise, it comes across as an image that's not really.
What does
all
it
that
do
easy.
about images?
So I don't know if this one had it in there. I've seen it do some wonky things with images, but for the most part, it does convert it very well. Like this is one that I did, and I emailed the PDF and I put convert in the title, and I've been able to take notes, highlight things, all kinds of stuff. It's absolutely beautiful. So if you have a Kindle device and you do reading and you find something on the web interesting that you like, email it to yourself, put the word convert in there.
But there's no way after the fact? You just have to like cryptically know to do this email.
Yes, and that's the thing that's kind of frustrating about it as I was looking at it, because I first emailed it as a PDF and I was like, man, this is horrible. I can't even read it because it was so small
Right.
on my Kindle. And I was like, okay. And then you'd zoom in and it would chop off half the paragraph on the right or the left, wherever you'd zoom to. So it was like, I can't read it like this.
Right.
And so I did some searching, and sure enough, you just do convert. Now, the thing is, if it's a huge document, it might take a little while for it to make it to your Kindle, but still extremely useful.
Yeah. Nice tip.
Yep. And for programmers, this is great because if you find a good reference, then you can take notes on your thing.
Well, that's why I was asking about the images, because sometimes some of the books that I've read, they'll have like figures, for example, or tables or something like that to like illustrate some issue, and sometimes that might just be straight up like, here's a screenshot.
I'll try and do one real quick. Let me find a PDF.
All right.
Well,
Who's
while
turn?
they're doing that, I'll go ahead with my tip of the week. Unless I should wait.
No. I'm
Go
not
ahead.
waiting. Yeah, please.
All right.
Well, I'm waiting.
Or yeah.
They're
I'm
doing
not
that.
making you wait. My bad.
We'll update. So my tip of the week is stolen from @Ray Hammond. Thanks, Ray. He sent me a command, fgrep. Is basically it's a bash command for searching in files. It's basically quicker than doing a find. Do your file name type filters and then piping that over to grep and searching for stuff. This lets you just kind of do things a little bit easier with some additional flags. But what I really like about it, and what it kind of reminded me, is how powerful your computer really is. You've got this tool here that Windows, Mac, Linux, whatever, you've got great command line utilities that you can use to automate tasks. So a lot of times I'll find myself doing things that through the UI, double clicking, doing things basically the hard way, when a lot of times you can just type 5 little letters and get the information much faster. So you should use your command line and write some scripts and automate your life, yo.
Yeah, I mean, the specific example that he was talking about, where it's like where you do a find, you pipe that to grep, that is so just ingrained into my brain that like if I need to do something, that's often the way I'll do it. And when he mentioned this fgrep, I'm like, oh wait, I didn't even realize that was an option.
Yep.
So that was
nice.
an awesome little thing. All right, so here's the closure to the tease from earlier. We know that I like Git, right? Like we might have talked about that once or twice. And as I mentioned earlier, I am rather meticulous about, when it comes time to put a commit together, and I will, review the code to make sure that, what I'm about to put in about to commit is actually what I want. So in other words, did I leave? I want to make sure that I didn't accidentally leave any console.log statements in there, or any debug statements, or leave any commented out code that I didn't intend to, things like that, right? All things that we've talked about in this episode, right? And for some environments, if you're working, if your preference is to use a visual tool, then you can quickly, click on those files and view what the differences are. But if, like me, you prefer to work with the command line, then, you can just use git diff to be your friend, right? And so typically, if you had some file, let's just say it was foobar.txt, right? Then you could do git diff foobar.txt, and Git will show you all of the differences in the version that you have that hasn't yet been staged for a commit compared to what is already staged or already committed. So it'll show you those newly introduced changes. And I say the already staged part because if you do a git add on that file and then later make new changes, then git diff will show you those new changes since the last time you added it to be staged, right? Before you've committed it. But here's the cool one that I wanted to mention is that that's fine and dandy if you want to go file by file and do that, right? And sometimes you might want to do it file by file, especially if there's a lot of changes in there. But let's say that like whatever your path is, you have multiple files that all have changes in it. You can just do, let's say that it's in the current directory. Let's say you got 5 files that have changed and they're all in the current directory that you're in. You could do, or even let's say that it was in a specific directory, right? That the specific directory that you're in and files that have changed in another directory you don't care to look at just yet. You could do git diff period, for example, for the current directory, and Git will show you the differences of all the files in that directory, right? Now, I say that the git diff period because you could also explicitly state whatever path you're interested in seeing. So you could just say git diff and then a more verbose path if that's what you're interested in. Or if you're not interested in any one path, but interested in all of them, so maybe you have, let's say, 2 files that have changed, but they're in, each a separate directory, and maybe those are, long path names. You could just do git diff, and Git will show you the changes of all the files, right? So it's a nice and handy way that if you want to review your changes before you commit them or before you even stage them, right? You don't necessarily have to go line by line with your git diff command. You could just specify a specific directory or not, and see all the changes.
So I'm back, and I just found a PDF that had some images in it, and I did a convert, and it looks pretty outstanding. So here. Yeah,
All
so
right.
the convert looks like it worked for a short story with
Oh my
images.
god, it's
in
been
it.
so long since I've used one of these. I'm like trying to pinch and zoom. I'm like, why is this not working?
So looking at this thing
It's like going into an epileptic seizure whenever I.
yeah, redrawing the screen and all that. Man, I love that Kindle. The Paperwhite, by the way, if you do want a Kindle, that thing is awesome because it has a backlight on it that you can read in the dark, in the day, whatever.
Wait, this one has a backlight? Oh.
Yeah, dude, turn the light off, you can read that thing in the dark. That is the only... So I never wanted a Kindle or a Nook or anything until they had that edge lighting because I was like, okay, this makes sense. Now I can read this thing, sitting in a dimly lit room or whatever. So it's fantastic. But yes, the Convert actually did the image conversion as well, and it looks really nice.
But it won't let you like zoom in on the image though.
I don't think you can zoom in on anything on it, so you can change the font size and all that. But that's kind of what I was getting at when you convert something to the Kindle format. Really, all you're getting is the ability to make your fonts larger and smaller, and to have locations that you can go back and forth to. So I don't
Well,
think
in other
you could-
formats, though, if there were images, you could
You'd
tap
zoom.
the image, and then that would bring the image up, and then you could, and maybe I'm just, because I use the Kindle app on my phone, so maybe that's more what I'm thinking of. But
yeah.
so maybe that's a smartphone or iPad, tablet or phone feature that they don't support on the actual Kindle.
Yeah, I don't think that
Because like
is-
even if you tap on the image, it doesn't do anything.
yeah, it's
And I don't
not
know if
about
that's
images.
I don't know if that's part of it being a Kindle device, or if that's a part of the conversion.
Yeah, I think that's part of the conversion. It's literally like really what you get on the regular Kindle reader is just font sizes is pretty much what you deal with. But the images came over across well.
Yeah,
They
they
look
did.
good.
They looked really good.
So that's kind
Surprising.
of cool. So yeah, that's my extended, long, well drawn out tip of the week.
All right.
Very nice. Well, this week we talked about the beginner segment of Robert L. Reed's book, How to Be a Programmer. We've got a link to that in the show notes, and we focused on the necessary personal and team skills you will need to survive in this industry. So,
Yep.
hope you liked it.
Yep. And as we said before, be sure if you're listening to this because a friend loaned you their device that had this on there, or they somehow hooked you up with this, or if you're listening to it on the web or some other outlet and you haven't already subscribed to us, be sure to subscribe to us on iTunes or Stitcher or more using your favorite podcast app. And as Alan mentioned earlier, be sure to leave us a review on those platforms too. We greatly appreciate it, and it goes a long way to helping us be found by other people.
Yep. And visit us at www.codingblocks.net where you can find our show notes, our examples, discussions, and more.
And send your feedback, questions, rants, and Slack invite requests to comments at codingblocks.net, and follow us on Twitter at codingblocks.